so tonight we're just going to cover planning and zoning authority, and then decisions and appeal. We'll cover the other two next work session. And also, just kind of as a background, I understand that this may be review for several of the commissioners, but just kind of want to provide again a little bit of background and context, and then there are a couple of updates that legal wanted to provide given some activity in recent months / over the course of the last year or so. So really we just want to start with an overview of where Planning and Zoning Commission's authority comes from, land use law sort of more generally and broadly speaking, that as a community we have our ability to do land use planning and to make these types of decisions stemming from constitutional grant of our police power. So that Idaho Constitution provides that we as the local governing body have the ability to provide for the general health and welfare of our community through police, sanitary, and other regulations, anything that is not in conflict with its charter or with the state's general laws. Where that seems very broad, the Local Land Use Planning Act is really where the statutory authority comes to the city for us to be able to do planning and zoning and have other generals and specifics in terms of how we want to develop our area. So in that Local Land Use Planning Act, or what we refer to often as LUPA, that actually provides a mandate that cities and counties plan and zone. It's a direct command to the various localities of making sure that we're utilizing our governing body to plan and zone in accordance with the needs of our area. That local, or the LUPA, provides basics of what and how. And also I want to just mention too that the local police power and land use authority is generally referenced to under Title 50 as well. That just gives grant cities, again, of kind of reaffirming that police power in the Constitution. But under that LUPA, in the statutory framework, it actually directs for the creation of a Planning and Zoning Commission. Then in follow up to that, it gives outlines a lot of the duties and roles of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So where we have by local ordinance established that Planning and Zoning Commission, i.e. you all of you wonderful folks, a lot of those duties and authorities stem from LUPA. And so this is where it directs that we need to provide for zones. We have to regulate the height, number of stories, size, and use of lots, the percentage of lot occupancy, setbacks, density, all of those types of things. It's also under the LUPA that it gives the city authority to enter into things like development agreements that go along with a rezone. It outlines special use permits, conditions that can be put on permits, subdivisions, planned unit developments, and variances. So when you're looking at a development code at city level, a lot of it is going to echo at least a basic framework that's in the statutory scheme under LUPA. And then where you may see a little bit of variance in the local land use ordinances is that we can be more restrictive than state law, but we cannot be in conflict with it. Commissioner Gillespie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So since I've been on the commission now 8 or 10 years or so, we've changed the way we think about subdivisions at a procedural level on the commission and maybe in the city as a whole. We used to hear them and actually vote on them. And in some cases, I think we actually imposed conditions or flat out denied them. I always remember Commissioner Bradbury used to think that we couldn't do that LUPA basically said that if a subdivision complies, it's essentially automatic, and that our role was ministerial and not judgmental. What's the city's current view on straight subs that comply in every way with the zoning ordinances?
Well, and I see that Saline popped her camera on, so she may have more of a staff perspective on this. So I'll just keep it from the legal perspective. That again, it kind of comes to that we can be a little more restrictive as long as we're not in conflict with state statute. So from that sort of jumping off point, Saline, is there something you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. I do know that City Council has been wanting to hear subdivisions like public hearings. They take testimony, they allow neighborhood association comments and things like that. It's certainly not written out in Title 11 or in LUPA that way, but we've been treating them that way. And so they want to see us at the P&Z level to be doing a similar process. But essentially, you know, Milt, you're right. I mean, if they meet the basic standards of the zoning district, then especially a straight subdivision, then, you know, they are allowed to go on their merry way. But there are usually things that we want to see on top of that, like a pedestrian connection or an easement or things like that, that we might be in conflict with.
So one other quick question, Saline and Mary. So I know that in our procedures, which aren't LUPA, but the city ordinances, is it correct to say that there are no approval criteria for subdivisions?
That's
within
correct.
within the subdivision procedure at the very beginning of the section of code?
Yes, that's correct. There's no approval criteria like conditional use permits or rezones. It's, you know, if you comply with the zoning district's dimensional standards, then you're allowed to proceed.
Great, thank you.
And I think too, Commissioner Gillespie, that you know, I'll touch a little bit also on the city's discretion and some of the wide latitude in certain areas that planning and zoning and city council have with regards to use decisions. And that stems maybe not specifically from statutory language in LUPA, but just in general broader case law and how some of those statutes have been interpreted. So maybe I'll be able to answer a little bit more of that question as we get into a few other slides. So also under LUPA, it directs that the city has to create its comprehensive plan, of which you are all very familiar. And it essentially says that that comprehensive plan does not operate as a legally controlling zoning law, but rather serves as a guidance and advisement to the agency or the governing body responsible for making the zoning decisions. So where this often comes up, especially if you're looking at opposition to a particular project or things like that, and you have people making the argument that this does not comply with the comprehensive plan, the city is not able to deny applications solely based on that comprehensive plan. So if we're looking at a decision in front of Planning and Zoning Commission, certainly a lot of the approval criteria on various applications, for example, conditional use, or even a rezone, you have to show that it does comply with the comprehensive plan as one of those criteria to meet. But if it doesn't, that can't be your sole basis for denial. So for other criteria on any given application, that's where, as Commissioner Gillespie was referring to, you've got to look to Title 11 Development Code in terms of what decision making criteria you have to look at and what the deliberation should be tied to in either approving or denying an application.
Mary?
Yes.
So can we go back to that slide? Back. So it says setting may not deny an application. I think my recollection is that is a permit application. But for example, we can deny rezones based strictly on the comp plan, is my understanding, because the courts have held that a rezone is different than a permit application, which is, so could you talk about that different?
Yes, and I would agree with you in one aspect, but where there are two other criteria for rezones that I would hesitate as a commission to deny it solely on the basis that it didn't comply with a comprehensive plan, and also look to the other two criteria of it's not compatible with the other neighborhood, and tying it back into that as well. Certainly there is case law to support a rezone as kind of its own beast, if you will. But in terms of just really shoring up any kind of denial, I think that the commission is better advised to make sure that they tie that denial to 2 or 3 of those criteria. If it is based solely on the comprehensive plan, then the encouragement would be to really develop that record and make specific findings as to how it and why it does not comply with that comprehensive plan.
And Mary, the land use map is a specific legal entity within the comp plan, isn't it? Like, don't the courts recognize that piece in particular for rezoning?
They do look to that as as a basis. You're correct.
Thank you.
So kind of moving, sorry, I'm jumping back and forth, but moving in from the Boise City Code, development code into actual decision making. One of the broader perspectives that we just want to remind the Planning and Zoning Commission of is that so many of these applications come with criteria, and many of them, if not all, come with certain conditions for approval. And when this commission is reviewing those conditions of approval, a few just different principles to keep in mind. Anytime that we are asking for a sort of quid pro quo exchange in which us as a regulatory entity are requiring an applicant to give something of value in exchange for a regulatory approval on a permit or an application, that is considered to be an exaction. The city does have authority to do that. It's been routinely upheld in courts, and certainly has been recognized that he has the ability to impose those burdens as conditions of development approval. When looking at any conditions of approval, or as the commission in developing a record is looking at perhaps additional conditions of approval or modifying those conditions of approval, 2 principles really to keep in mind. And broadly speaking, those are that the condition must have a nexus with the development impact that this condition is intended to mitigate. And that condition must be roughly proportional to the impact that it is intended to mitigate. So fleshing those out a little bit, first talking about what kind of burdens that we often impose as conditions of development. Those would be things like requiring a road or sidewalks or curbs or some open space or the like, any kind of imposition of certain site-related entitlement exactions. When we're looking at the nexus requirement, it basically, our authority comes from that we can attach those conditions providing for offsite or even on-site public facilities to mitigate the effects it's going to have on the neighborhood in terms of that proposed development. And where we have to be careful is that where a governing board or the commission attaches some condition that's unacceptable, it is subject to a judicial review. So when we're talking about a nexus, it's really that it has to be, the condition has to be related to the impact it's creating. And to give an example, it's noted down on the bottom, there's a very famous case called Nolan. Nolan is sort of the premier or seminal case that talks about what the scope of authority to have exactions is. And in this case, there was a property owner in between, private property owner in between 2 beachfront lots. This property also had a shoreline and wanted to replace a small bungalow with like a 3-bedroom house. And in requiring or in allowing that development or redevelopment to happen, the governing body had required that they provide a lateral easement across the front of their property on the other side of this, between high tide and on the other side of the seawall. When they appealed this, Supreme Court essentially said, you're arguing that the construction of this 3-bedroom house from a small bungalow is impeding the ocean view, but you imposing this burden of a public easement across the property isn't related to an ocean view. And so it's overburdening and it's not a nexus to the impact that it's creating. So if you're talking about a beach view, then whatever condition you impose has to be about mitigating the impact on that beach view. They even went so far, the court even went so far as to say, you might even require a public viewing spot on these people's property, but not necessarily a lateral easement or cross access for the public. So when you're talking about a nexus, it really has to be that the condition is related to that impact. As far as roughly proportional, it's simply that it's not overburdening the property, but really just meeting the need of mitigating that impact. The seminal case in regards to that one was Dolan, and in Dolan there was a store owner that wanted to develop her land. It was in a floodplain. She wanted to add some shopping and some more parking and those types of things. The governing body was requiring the dedication of a greenway to help with some of that flood control. And because she was, and the flooding was going to be more of an issue because of greater impervious surfaces, water impervious surfaces with this development. So the court found, yes, you can ask for this dedication of a greenway. We understand that it does actually meet the nexus requirement of mitigating some of this flood control issue, but you need to have an analysis and you need to make sure that the dedication of this greenway is proportional to the flooding that these impervious surfaces are going to cause. So in essence, you can't ask more of a landowner in terms of mitigating impact than the actual impact itself. And there's nothing mathematical about it. It doesn't have to be an exact science, but just in terms of looking at conditions that are imposed of essentially, is it reasonable and does it meet the need? Oftentimes that sort of conditions of approval or things of that nature are going to be contained in a staff report, but certainly this commission has the discretion to approve or to deny those conditions of approval or to add its own conditions of approval. So really this is just kind of background in making sure that when those conditions are considered, that these principles are kept in mind. And in terms of adding or modifying conditions of approval from a staff report, really it's about making a record to support that decision, really highlighting the specific impact that this commission is identifying or that, you know, the public hearing is sort of teased out and developed in the record, and the intended mitigation and why that condition meets that intended mitigation. We're talking about decisions and appeals. There's a few process pointers that we wanted to just remind the commission of and give a little additional information on. In LUPA, it requires that any land use decisions be based on a reasoned statement. And that definition is that the approval or denial of any application shall be in writing, accompanied by a reasoned statement that explains the criteria and standards considered relevant, states the relevant contested facts relied upon, and explains the rationale for a decision based on the applicable provisions of the comprehensive plan, any relevant ordinance, statutory provisions, or other considerations. So really it's this reason statement, or starting with the criteria itself and what the contested facts are, making sure those are out there and stated on the record, that is going to drive the deliberations for the commission. And then as you're deliberating, you know, making sure again that you're tying back decisions or points that are being made back to those criteria and standards, using those contested facts that you're relying upon to do that. The rationale for the decision should be based not just on the criteria and standards, but you know, tying that back into ordinance or the comp plan or other facts in the record, any aspect of those criteria that you're looking to. And one note there also is that not each criteria has to be balanced evenly. So if there is a criteria that is met, but you know, others that aren't, obviously this commission has the ability to deny because one criteria wasn't met. There also may be several criteria that aren't met, but one is more important to the commission than another. And so when I say that each criteria doesn't necessarily have to be given equal weight, it's that in the deliberations, if just one criteria is not met and is relied upon using those standards, the contested facts and the rationale for decisions, as long as that is really developed in the record and the reason statement, that is sufficient to support, for example, a denial of an application. And where the commission can rely on staff and the amazing expertise of our staff is that oftentimes the staff report will provide this commission the reason statement if it fits the decision that the commission intends to make. So as noted on this particular slide, a very easy motion is that you would move to deny CUP for the reasons stated in the staff report. If you're not going to start with the staff report, or if there are changes or additions, conditions of approval, it doesn't hurt to kind of look at the framework that the staff report takes and just kind of going point by point in terms of where you're starting from and how you get to that decision. Again, there's not really any magic words that need to be contained in a reason statement or as far as a basis for decision making. It's just really that it elucidates the thinking of the commission and the reasons that you got there. And the portion that's highlighted is because it's very easy to make conclusory statements of just saying, this CUP does not meet the criteria in Title 11 XYZ, name the particular Boise City code. Given that that's a conclusory statement, you need to really tease out the reasons why it fails to meet that particular statutory requirement. And although legal is often too verbose, so I'm going to try not to do that tonight, brevity is not always a virtue. So in terms of these reason statements, it is important to make sure it's developed enough to where it has that meat, and somebody who was not a part of that hearing is coming into a cold record and looking at the basis for decision can really understand what the commission was going after when they made this particular decision on an application. So yeah, just to sort of reiterate, avoid conclusory statements, use your deliberations to mention specific facts and tie them into specific criteria. For example, oftentimes we're talking about compatibility with the neighborhood or something like that. You might say this is not compatible because it provides too high a density. It's not compatible because the surrounding area does not have significant commercial use. So just finishing that sentence with it's not compatible because, or giving things like, this is too dense for the neighborhood. This is too intense of a use given the surrounding areas are XYZ. The building is too high because there is no other building in the vicinity that is, within 15 feet of height of this proposed project. So just finishing that statement of not just it's too high, but really answering why. Also, this is more of a procedural aspect of, well, part of it is procedural. The first part is substantive, where when you are making a motion, target your motion to the specific application and address each set of criteria separately. There's two aspects of this that we really want to tease out with the commission. And one is that oftentimes you will have one project that has more than one application or subordinate applications. So for example, just in the recent meeting on January 11th, there was a project, I think it was on 33rd Street, but I might be wrong. But it was a rezone, a CUP for a planned unit development. And there was also a subdivision application within that. And when you're looking at approval or rejection of a particular application, first of all, in deliberations, making sure you're addressing the criteria that speak to each of those applications. Oftentimes there will be crossover, and one set of criteria is going to be applicable to another subordinate application or an additional application, but also being careful that you're meeting the criteria of each of those applications. So for that example, on at the January 11th meeting, with a rezone, you're just looking at 3 criteria of whether or not it is compatible with, or whether or not it meets the goals of the comprehensive plan, whether or not it serves the public interest, and whether or not it's compatible with the neighborhood uses and other areas in that zone. However, when you're looking at the conditional use permit aspect and considering the planned unit development, and I'm talking about ones that are, less than 2 acres, you're looking at compatibility with the neighborhood. You're looking at whether or not there's any undue burden on traffic. You're looking at the aspects of impact on public facilities, whether or not the space is large enough to accommodate the uses that are intended in this planned unit development, including open space or pedestrian pathways, things like that. You have to consider whether or not it adversely affects other properties, and you have to look to see whether it complies with the comprehensive plan. So when you're taking a vote or you're looking at an application that has more than one aspect to it, in the deliberations, make sure that you've addressed each of those. And then also just kind of bring back to the commission a reminder that it doesn't always have to be an all or none. So for example, if you wanted to approve the rezone, but didn't necessarily end the subdivision or recommend the rezone in the subdivision to council, since those are both recommendations from the commission that go on to council for final decision, but you didn't like how the PUD was or didn't feel like the design of the PUD met those standards, then you have the ability to deny the PUD. Oftentimes, again, because those criteria overlap, if you find one criteria isn't met for one application, it would also means that criteria isn't met for the other. And so definitely not a directive to the commission, but simply a reminder that with those subordinate applications, there does need to be deliberations in terms of criteria for those. And Aileen, you had something to add to that.
Yeah, I guess you mentioned, maybe recommend denial of the rezone, approve the PUD. I think you could do the alternate or the opposite, where you recommend denial of a rezone, but the PUD or the CUP, whatever the subordinate application is, you don't have to recommend denial. If you could put a condition on it that says this is allowed if the rezone is in place. I've only seen a couple instances where this could be the route that you take, but and so staff will try to remind you of that, but just know that the appeal process for city council, they are given a very small toolbox on how you guys may have erred. And if the error is they didn't have the zoning in place, but of course they didn't have the zoning in place, P&Z doesn't make the decision and council could overturn it, then that could be, it's harder to explain that as an error because you guys didn't really error, but it's, I guess, limitations of our code is what it comes down to.
And I would state that it is a rare circumstance, but when we're looking, and I only have about 3 or 4 slides left, but one thing we are going to touch on is appeals. And that really, when you're talking about developing a record and supporting the decision, that if those applications applications that are going forward on one particular project don't have all of the same criteria, of making sure in your decision or deliberations as a commission that you address each of those in the deliberations. Commissioner Gillespie?
I'm going to lower my hand and let it go.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to note too was substitute motions, because oftentimes when you're deliberating criteria or looking at conditions of approval, certainly you might have a motion on the table that says I move to approve, rezone XYZ as for the reasons provided in the staff report. And then given additional discussion, you may want to add a condition of approval. So I just wanted to take a moment to remind the commission of how to do substitute motions when there are additional conditions that may be put on or a change in what is going to be approved or denied or for what reasons. You can do it in 2 ways, but basically both require 2 votes. One is a procedural vote and one is the substantive vote. So if Commissioner Gillespie were to make a motion and Madam Chair would suggest an amendment to that or a change to that, then Commissioner Gillespie can withdraw that motion, and with the approval of the chair and just a quick unanimous consent of the commission, that motion can be withdrawn. That primary motion can be withdrawn. And then with that added condition of approval that the chair might have suggested, a new motion could be made and seconded. So that's one way it could be done. A second way is, we'll take the same circumstance. Commissioner Gillespie makes a motion, another commissioner adds a condition of approval. In making a second motion, that other commissioner can say, I move to approve, but with this added condition, and another commissioner can second that. Then there is the procedural vote. That is voting to discuss the substitute motion. And then you deliberate on the substance of that substitute motion and take a vote on whether or not to actually approve or deny that particular substitute motion. So little bit of procedure there that needs to occur, and that really is just for a point of order in making sure that the decision is clean and that the motion that is being decided is in agreement on by all of the commission, or every commissioner understands what motion it is that's being decided. All right, and then kind of following up real briefly, I'll try to finish up in the next 2 or 3 minutes on something that Saline was pointing out in terms of error, is that the city council has pretty narrow latitude in reviewing decisions that are made by the commission. So certainly there are some applications that go up to council on recommendation, but where this decision or where this commission is this decision-making body, changing your decision requires that the council find error in how this commission deliberated or made the decision. As far as that approval criteria, it's laid out very specifically in terms of what constitutes error. And that is, I'll let you read through that list. I don't need to recite all of it for you, but essentially it's a violation of some constitutional state or city law, exceeding authority, some unlawful procedure. And really the big one is where it's arbitrary or without rational basis, not supported by substantial evidence. When you're talking about, the latitude that this commission has, some of these are not like strictly defined, but where you're looking at things like constitutional or state law, obviously we have to fall within those things. And that's where that sort of nexus or roughly proportional might come into play, where we were talking about Nolan and Dolan, where if this commission decided to impose a condition that was widely outside of a reasonable range. Really, most of the time, what we're looking at is unlawful procedure or the arbitrary and capricious. And that's where making motions and those types of things is, and providing the due process, which we'll talk more about next time, is very important to preserve that procedure. And when you're looking at arbitrary, I'm going to go to the next slide to show how arbitrary is defined. So really, when we're looking at how to prevent error, and especially that arbitrary and capricious or not based on substantial evidence, we have it defined in code that arbitrary is defined as basically made without any rational basis. So this is where, you identify the facts, you tie them to the criteria, and you explain the rationale. You're essentially going to overcome any argument that the decision was arbitrary. And if there's conflicting evidence in the record, it is okay that this commission exercise discretion in what evidence to give weight to, and just explaining why you find that evidence to be the more credible, even if there's conflicting views on the record. And the reason that the deliberations of commission is so important is even on appeal to the city council, if it goes on to a court decision, it's really the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision that is the focus of judicial review. And this is where I wanted to take just a brief minute to talk about a very recent case, Scott versus City of Boise. And this probably fresh in the commissioner's mind, where this was a project that came forward for a condominium project, and they were requesting a height exception and wanted to go up to 81 feet. After deliberation, the commission approved a height exception to 63 feet. And then the council, when it went up to council, reversed the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision, saying that it was arbitrary, and they modified that height to 70 feet. And really, when it went up to the court for judicial review, they affirmed that where there's room for two opinions, the action by this commission is not arbitrary or capricious, where it is exercised honestly and upon due consideration. And what was critically important in that case was that this commission had developed the record and thoroughly deliberated it. They tied that height of 63 feet to other specific facts and criteria in the record. And that court case also reaffirmed that council really has that limited appellate role under our development code. And it's only where it is arbitrary that the council has the ability to overturn. And then finally, just one last real quick reminder is with regards to the discretion that the commission does have in making sure that you do exercise it and not unduly rely on a decision on one particular aspect or another. And this case is I'm bringing forward just as an example where there was a project that came forward. It was a 5-story apartment complex, and the commission approved it based on minimum parking standards, but based on public opposition and some evidence that was brought forward at the record on the record at the public hearing, the court overturned that, saying that the commission failed to take into account evidence of how it would adversely affect other properties. And so that is where the court directed that you can't simply rely on a minimum standard, but that this commission does have broad discretion to impose other conditions to make sure that it meets the criteria laid out in code. And I went over the time I intended, and I want to leave a little time to Celine to go over to the agenda. So Commissioner Gillespie.
So just one quick point on the Lust decision. I think the pivotal part of the record from P&Z that the court cited was where it was either Commissioner Story or Commissioner Stevens said that they could not consider any parking issues. So rather than say, we've considered them and we don't think it's important, which I think they would have passed muster with the court, instead they put on the record, we cannot. And so we should just, all of us, be careful, and it's really hard to do sometimes, to not exclude any set of reasoning or fact pattern or any logic tree from our discussions categorically, because it's pretty clear that that was the problem in that case.
I agree with that characterization very much. Thank you for the clarification, Commissioner Gillespie.
All right, we are running out of time. So save any questions for James for next month. I think it's always good to go through these kinds of refreshers with the commission because your service does matter considerably, especially when it goes through judicial review or up to council or anything like that. So making sure that we always provide a good record and it's on a sound judgment. So thank you, Mary, for your time. Well, I guess you're still hanging out with us, so don't go. All right, really quick, we've got just a quick agenda tonight. We've got minutes for January to approve. Number 1 is CUP 20-63 on U-Stick, electronic message display sign. We're recommending approval. We're not aware of any opposition, so we can try for the consent agenda. Number 2, ZOA 20-3 is an amendment to the development code for demolition. We always try to hear code amendments. We did receive some late correspondence So we might have 1 or 2 people tonight, but I think it should be fairly quick. And then the main event, number 3, CR 20-25, is a rezone on Boise Avenue in protest. If you remember a year ago, we saw this project, so it's coming back at us. And we have a few people signed up. I have a feeling that there will be more online. So that'll be the main event tonight. We do have 2 neighborhood associations that are wanting to speak. Southeast Neighborhood Association is the main neighborhood association on record, but the depot bench is nearby. So we need to make sure that we either split the time accordingly or ask depot bench to take just 3 minutes. I don't believe Southeast will go over their time, but it depends on the applicant and how long they go. Does that make sense? Yes?
You don't think you don't think South
I don't think Southeast will take.
would go over the 10 minutes or the 5 if we split it?
Probably 10.
10.
I think the applicant's going to be asking for 20.
Okay.
So if we can split up the 2 neighborhood associations between that 20, I think we can
Okay, great.
all come out happy. So,
Okay, thank you.
all right, we've got a minute break and we'll be back here soon. All right, good evening and welcome to the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing. A few things to start out with for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you'll be called upon and unmuted. There is a chat function in Zoom. This is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. If the chat function isn't available for you, you can email zoninginfo@cityofboise.org. Our procedures for public hearings begin with a presentation from the planning team. Then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, followed by questions from the commission. After that, we proceed to public testimony, starting with those who are in person, which we don't have anyone here tonight, then who signed up on the online sign-up sheet in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. If you are attending through your telephone, you can type in *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. We are strict with this time as it is limited in code. Finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. Tonight's agendas and proceedings might have a bit of a delay as we all navigate through the technology. Please be courteous and kind while we venture through this hybrid format. Madam Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Celine. We are citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. We make final decisions on conditional use permits, variances, and appeals, and recommendations to the city council on subdivisions, rezones, annexations, and code or comprehensive plan amendments. Any decision made tonight may be appealed to the city council, provided that the appeal is filed within 10 days of this hearing. In order to file an appeal, you must have given written or oral testimony at tonight's meeting. So that's why it's important that you give your name and address when you testify tonight. We utilize a consent agenda. This means that if the applicant agrees with the staff report and if there is no public opposition, the item will be placed on the consent agenda. All items that are placed on the consent agenda are approved with one motion without further public comment. For items not on the consent agenda, we will hold a full public hearing in the order just detailed a few moments ago with staff, applicant, neighborhood association, and then the public testimony. Thank you all for virtually attending tonight, and will the clerk please call the roll?
Then,
Here.
Schaefer, Squires, Blanchard,
Here.
Moore,
Here.
Gillespie,
Here.
and Frock.
Here.
5 present, 2 absent.
Thank you. Without objection, I'll place the minutes from January 4th, 2021, and also the minutes from January 8th, 2021 on the consent agenda. The other item for the consent agenda is item number 1. Is the applicant present? This is CUP 20-63 for Idaho Electric Signs at 9950 West Ustick Road. If the applicant is present, please raise your hand. Okay, again, I'm looking for the applicant for maybe Dan Conlin. I don't see him on. So not seeing him, I'm still going to place item number 1 on the consent agenda.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if we can ask if there's any opposition.
Thank you. Is anybody online tonight that is looking to testify in opposition of this item tonight? Please virtually raise your hand. Okay, seeing none, now we will place item 1 on the consent agenda. And that's all we have for the consent agenda. So will the clerk please, the chair will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
I move that we approve the minutes from January 4th and January 8th and item number 1, CUP 20-63 on the consent agenda.
Second.
Great, we have a second from Commissioner Finfrock. Will the clerk please call the vote?
Then,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie,
Aye.
and Frock.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, the first item up is item number 2. This is ZOA 20-3 for Boise City Planning and Development Services. This is an amendment to section 11-3-4.11 of the Development Code. So up first, we'll hear from staff. Please go ahead, Mr. Riddle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. Can everyone hear me and see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So we're pleased to be proposing an amendment to the development code this evening that's related to the demolition of select structures in the city. As most of you, I'm sure, are aware, there's been a growing concern over the loss of buildings in our community. The concerns have really been focused in 3 primary areas: loss of affordable housing, sustainability, and then historic preservation. Demolition of existing housing to accommodate new development has certainly been the subject of some rough hearings recently. These activities also often send materials that might otherwise be used directly to the landfill. That wasteful and certainly outdated practice is inconsistent with the city's broader goals around sustainability. And then finally, structures that are potentially significant from a historic perspective are being or have been demolished without any review. Our ability to regulate demolition activity outside of the historic districts is certainly limited. Until recently, demolition permits were actually issued over the counter in days, if not hours. You probably recall a code amendment recently that required staff level review for demolition for structures in the D or design review overlay. I want to be clear that neither that amendment or this one is intended to outright prohibit demolition. Again, outside the historic districts, we probably really can't. It doesn't, however, mean that we can't be much more thoughtful and careful about it. The proposed amendment this evening creates an opportunity to explore alternatives to sending materials just directly to the landfill. In the case of older structures, it provides an opportunity or a chance to document historic resources prior to any removal. And then finally, in the case of residential dwellings, it provides us the opportunity to discuss ways that we might minimize impacts on those that are being displaced. So the current amendment, again, it would apply to properties located outside the historic and design review overlays. Much like the amendment you saw a while back for design review, it will require administrative review prior to demolition of any multifamily residential, commercial, office, or industrial building, regardless of the zoning district or overlay. And it'll also require the review for demolition for any single-family residence that was constructed more than 50 years ago. Again, the intent here isn't to stop demolition, but it's to be much more thoughtful about it. It provides a slight pause to make sure there aren't alternatives or simply time to have conversations that we just simply haven't been able to have historically. Specifically, to work with our peers in housing community development if a demolition involves displacement, to work with our friends in the preservation community if we're talking about a historic resource, and then finally with our partners in the building department who are currently working almost in conjunction with this on a reuse and recycling ordinance that should be making its way to council, hopefully around the same time as this. I believe that concludes our comments or my comments. We are recommending approval of the amendment this evening. As detailed in your packet, we believe it is consistent with the policy guidance of Blueprint Boise, and to date, we are only aware of support for the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Okay, since staff is the applicant, we'll move along. And do we have questions from the commission for staff on this?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
Yeah, I had a question for Cody. So in public comment, there were some questions about why we didn't include the agricultural and the religious buildings in this revision. So I just wanted to know if you could maybe touch on that.
Madam Mayor, I almost said Councilor Commissioner Finfrock. A little out of practice with y'all. I think that certainly would be fine to include something like that in a motion if you were to move to approve this evening. We just considered office, commercial, industrial, kind of our broad land use categories. Certainly the intent there would be to include those other types of buildings, but if the commission feels it's important to call those out, I think that would be just fine to include in a recommendation.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
Okay, so just a quick follow-up on that. Do you think it's important, or do you think it would maybe hold the process up a little bit?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Finfrock, I do think it's important, and no, if you include that in your motion, this amendment could proceed to council just with that change.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So what is intended to happen during this 15-day administrative approval? Is there kind of some questions that an applicant might expect to receive? Are there any sort of requirements for things asked, or is it just kind of a chance to review what's being proposed to be demolished?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, that's a good question. A little of all of that, honestly. We would, upon receiving these applications, we would transmit for comment to the neighborhood association and some of those other agencies that I mentioned, where they have the opportunity to provide input. And just that there's transparency, honestly, around demolition, where today folks don't know something's being demolished until, the equipment shows up and the structure's gone. If the project involves the displacement of residents, it would allow us to engage folks. And if something is still to be demolished, perhaps look at opportunities to help those that are being displaced. really just to have those conversations. But yes, the application materials would be transmitted to those groups immediately upon receipt, and then they'd have that 2-week window to provide us with comment.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
just a follow up. So in this comment, how are these kind of conversations, or are they conditions of approval for a demolition that you might be held to follow? Or is there some middle ground to that? I mean, how final would these comments be?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, probably in terms of conditions, I can see scenarios where we condition, and these are demolition permits where there's not a specific project proposed. So you can see conditions where to require the site to be restored to a safe condition, things like that. If there were situations where you were maybe demolishing a historic structure, we could perhaps put conditions that allowed it. I think this commission included something on a conditional use permit recently on the fly for a project, music subdivision, where it allowed a preservation group to go in and document what was being demolished, photo documents. It creates those kind of opportunities that we just don't have now.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing no further questions. We didn't have anybody signed up for this item tonight, but if you would like to testify on this item, please virtually raise your hand. Great, I see one up, so we'll start with Sheila Grisham. And Sheila, just give us a moment to get you switched over to speaker, and then please start with your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Sheila, you should be good to go now once you unmute.
Okay. Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Sheila Grisham. I live at 1204 East State Street, Boise, 83712. And tonight I am speaking on behalf of the East End Neighborhood Association. I just wanted to say that ENA is in support of ZOA 20-00003, the demolition delay. We are glad to see a demolition delay be put into place to help protect the historic districts and structures that are more than 50 years old. Putting a 14-day delay on a demolition is not going to make or break a project, and it seems a reasonable request to allow the city time to see if there are any other alternatives to demolition, to make sure the structure isn't a landmark or contributing in some other way, and to be able to document any possible historic resources. Keeping materials from demolition and out of the landfill is the best thing for our environment, and a remodel is much less expensive than a brand new building, which could possibly help with the affordable housing crisis that Boise is experiencing at this time. The one thing that ENA would request is that any neighborhood association be notified of any demolition request within their boundaries. It's much better for a neighborhood association to have that information before a demo is done. There may be times when the neighborhood association has questions or comments or concerns, and it would be nice if they were given that opportunity to express those concerns. ENA is happy to see this demolition delay ordinance be put forward by the city. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Sheila. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on this item tonight? Please virtually raise your hand. Great, we'll go to Jody Hull. And again, if there's anybody else, please go ahead and get those virtual hands raised, and we'll just move on down the list. So Jody, once you, looks like you're good to go now. Once you unmute, please start with your name and address.
Okay, there I am. My name is Jody Hull, and I live at 7916 West Queen Court. I wasn't really prepared to talk on this topic tonight, but I've been involved in trying to get this kind of ordinance passed since they demolished the Cole School many years ago. So I'm happy to see it's finally getting out there. And I haven't had a chance to really look through the final version here, but I'm a little concerned about the 2 weeks notice because things happen so fast in the city. And I know my neighborhood association is a little slow on getting involved in things. They like to meet and talk. And so I don't know if 2 weeks is really going to be enough, probably for minor buildings, but any kind of historic building, that's a pretty short amount of time to like get your group together and get your notes together. So I don't know if it's possible to change that now but it seems like a month, 30 days would be a little more reasonable. But, and then like I said, I haven't had a chance to look through all the details, but I'm glad to see at least something is going forward because we sorely need that in this town. Like you said, I've seen permits pulled 1 in the morning and then the building's down by night and nobody, like Preservation Idaho, and then the historic groups had even heard about it. So, and so I don't know if that's a requirement too, that certain groups be notified if it's a historic building or neighbors, 300 feet. I don't know what's going to be required actually. So that was just my main comment right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Do we have anybody else that would like to speak on this item tonight? Please virtually raise your hand. Okay, seeing nobody else, we will go back to staff for a 5-minute rebuttal as the applicant.
Madam Chair, just very briefly in response to that one comment, we would again transmit to a couple of the comments, we would transmit the application materials to the neighborhood association and then other groups like we would with most applications, Preservation Idaho, State Historic Preservation Office, and things like that. So they would be certainly made aware of applications where they weren't before. And then if approved, we would copy the neighborhood associations on then that approval letter. So they'd be informed of kind of the decision and of course a right to appeal. And with that, that's all I have.
Thank you, Cody. Great. Well, with that, we'll close this portion of the hearing and the item is before the commission.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
I recommend approval of ZOA 20-3 along with the recommended and standard conditions of approval with the addition of the administrative approval to include agricultural and religious buildings.
Second.
Great. We have a second from Commissioner Moore. Is there discussion? You want to kick it off, Commissioner Finfrock?
Sure. I think this is just pretty straightforward. I can appreciate the 14-day notice, but like Cody pointed out, there's going to be lots of opportunity to appeal if somebody doesn't agree with the city's decision. So I think that it's great that we're getting this actually on the record and that they have a chance to have a say in their neighborhood.
Great. Any further discussion? Okay, so we have a motion to recommend approval for ZOA 20-3 to include also agricultural and religious buildings. Will the clerk please call the vote?
Dead.
Aye.
Blanchard.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Gillespie.
Aye.
Finfrock.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, so moving on to our next item. This is item number 3, CAR 20-25 for CDG Acquisitions, LLC at 1909 and 2001 West Boise Avenue. This is a rezone of 3.3 acres. We will start with staff, and when you're ready, please, Ms. Accord.
All right. Oops. Sorry, hold on. Too much technology. There we go. Now you can see me. All right, commissioners, this item before you tonight is a request for a rezone with a development agreement at 1909 and 2001 West Boise Avenue. The site is on the edge of the downtown and southeast planning areas and adjacent to the Boise State campus at the intersection of Boise Avenue, Protest Road, and Beacon Street. This may seem oddly familiar, or maybe deja vu with 2020 spillover, but you did see a very similar request at this exact location February 10th of last year, our epic 2 a.m. hearing. Hopefully we won't go that long tonight. The property is designated mixed use in the comprehensive plan and is located in the heart of an activity center. This designation allows for almost every zoning district so as to encourage more active uses. The site is currently split zoned with R2 and C1D zones. The applicant is requesting to change the zoning to RODDA, or residential office with design review and a development agreement. The RO zone is present in the neighborhood across the street. And the project report analyzed the current zones, the proposed zone, and other potential zones, and there are different allowances with regards to setbacks and density. I won't go through all of that analysis again, but in summary, the height, setbacks, and density proposed with this project are very closely aligned with other potential zoning districts, such as the R3, the C1, and the C2 zones. In short, the planning team believes the RO zone, along with the development agreement and its conditions, are consistent with the long-term vision for the area. The concept plan includes a 3-story structure with 175 units, with 547 bedrooms, with 274 underground parking spaces, and 550 bicycle parking spaces. It also includes 2,300 square feet of retail space at the intersection, along with a public plaza and bus shelter, which, yes, okay. All of the units on the ground floor will be walk-ups with front doors along the street to help provide a more pedestrian-scaled project with activation on the street. With this proposal, they will be tiling the drain on site. And the applicant also intends to underground the overhead power lines and provide Class 1 and Class 2 trees along the streets with detached sidewalks. They're also providing alternative transportation options within their project with scooters and car shares. Height was a concern for the last project, so the applicant has been mindful to keep this at 3 stories and remove condenser units and paint the rooftop green to help prevent glaring. And they are at a height of 37 feet. Overall, the planning team believes the project is suitable for the area. Conditions have been included in the draft development agreement that the applicant provided. And the planning team recommends to include a few other conditions, such as the max allowed units and bedrooms, the minimum parking required, the minimum bicycle parking required, making sure those 2 alternative transportation options are included, that 1 access point is taken for vehicular access. Included a few other uses that could go in that corner space to try to get Class 2 trees along the streets when possible, depending on what fire department requirements are for aerial apparatus. And then tree mitigation for 176 caliper inches, either on the site or off-site within 2 miles of the site. There have been neighborhood concerns, which were similar with the project the last go round, including height, density, parking and traffic, the existing vegetation, the drainage facility, and the loss of affordable housing. The applicant is proposing a height of 37 feet and for the rooftop and 42 feet for the mechanical unit equipment. The RO limits density to 45 feet when adjacent to residential uses. So what the applicant is proposing complies with code. Density and how it correlates with parking and traffic are a concern for the immediate neighborhood. As detailed in the report, the density in bedrooms proposed are well under the maximum allowed and not that much higher than what other comparable zones would be. Some believe there should be 1 parking space per bedroom, but the concept complies with parking standards and the site location has so many amenities nearby within walking distance, which will encourage residents to walk and bike. The project is also including those modes of alternative transportation and provides triple the amount of required bicycle parking. Many trees on the site are in poor health, while others are in excellent condition and certainly add to the urban tree canopy of the neighborhood. Typically, mitigation is required only for right-of-way trees, but the planning team is recommending mitigation occur for the healthiest of trees, which comes to about 176 caliper inches. The landscape plan for the new project shows 100 caliper inches planned on site. So in coordination with the Parks Department, they suggested the remaining mitigation could occur off-site within 2 miles, in which the applicant has agreed to. As for the drainage facility, there was a comprehensive letter from Drainage District number 3 that went into the detail about Drain A. I believe they are also in attendance tonight. As is standard for most facilities, the relocation will be reviewed by Public Works Department as well as the Drainage District to ensure the improvements meet their standards. This will not impose any water rights issues, as the drain is just that, a drain where water flows to, and it's not irrigation water by right. Finally, and probably most importantly for most of the comments that you'll hear tonight, is about the loss of affordable housing. We certainly aren't promoting demolition or the removal of affordable housing, but the structure is not historic building, nor is it landmarked. And because you just recently heard our proposal for demolition ordinance, this hearing with the rezone going through Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council well exceeds the 2-week proposed for the code amendment that you just heard. Tonight, we're simply reviewing the merits of the change of the zone. And as you know, there are no current regulations on providing affordable housing within new developments, but the applicant has proposed a relocation package for tenants and is voluntarily including income restricted units. So the tenant assistant package would be a minimum 6 months advance notice. They'd work with a management company to find a new home. They would provide funds to cover the increase in rents that may incur over the first 2 years of moving out, and an affordable option to return if the project is built. As far as the income restricted housing, the applicant has proposed 10 units offered at 60% AMI for the first 3 years of operation, and the current residents, if they would like to come back, would be provided first option, and then any units remaining would be then provided to the public. Let's see. The other thing though is that we've been in communication with our housing and community development colleagues, and the project is likely a good candidate for the new housing incentive program, which may make these 10 units available for 15 years at different AMI rates. So that's still to be determined depending on if the project is approved and if funding is available at that time, but there are other alternatives that the applicant is exploring. I should note with the development agreement, both the tenant assistance package and the income restricted housing were included as exhibit D and E. And after discussing it a little bit further with our legal colleagues, we think it best to take it out of the development agreement and instead reference a income restricted covenant or a tenant assistance package covenant or something like that, because these terms will likely change over time depending on the term of the housing, and to have to go through this whole process through planning and zoning and city council to change, 80% AMI versus 60% AMI is a lot of red tape. So we would recommend when we go on to council to remove those 2 exhibits from the development agreement, but still have these details, these exact details in a separate recorded document between the applicant and the city. The applicant is here and can fill you in with wherever I might have left out additional information. And as a reminder, the planning team is recommending approval of the rezone, and you can modify, remove, or add any additional conditions to the development agreement as you see fit. And you are the recommending body to City Council. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Celine. First, we will move to the applicant. We'll start with 20 minutes. Ms. Dalton, do you think that'll be enough?
Thank you. That would be great. And I'm just going to pull up my presentation before I get started. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
Yes, looks good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, members of the commission. My name is Deborah Nelson. I'm an attorney with Gibbons Pursley. My address is 601 West Bannock Street in Boise, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Collegiate Development Group. Thank you to Celine for all of her hard work on this application and this project, for her detailed presentation. I think we'll try to shorten some things up following those details. We're in agreement with the project report and all of staff's proposed conditions. Other members of the development team are with me this evening in case you've got questions that they can best answer. And also following me, Brent Stiles will be presenting. He's going to cover some details about the new application design and the operations on behalf of CDG. I'm going to start with some of the context about why this project is both needed and appropriate in this location based on the city's comprehensive plan and the surrounding zones and development. Does not look like my slides are advancing. Okay, there we go. First of all, focusing on the need. The City of Boise needs more housing of all types, as the staff report notes, and as this commission really knows all too well. The City of Boise is experiencing a housing crisis. Boise has the lowest vacancy rate in the top 100 markets in the country. The pandemic has only sped up the in-migration to our community. The high demand, low supply is causing rapid rent growth, currently at 16% per year. And specifically, more housing is needed to support BSU students and BSU employees. Fewer than 5,500 on-campus and off-campus beds are currently available to serve nearly 13,000 undergraduate students. And a very telling current data point, occupancy rates for off-campus housing remain at or near 100% as of January 2021. This lack of supply has caused students to migrate into the Southeast Boise neighborhood, displacing other families. This project will help bring over 500 students out of the surrounding neighborhood and freeing up other housing. So to meet that housing need, CDG is proposing a development that includes 175 units with 537 bedrooms, a mix of unit types and amenities that target students, as well as non-students, such as BSU employees or young workers that want to be near town but would enjoy the amenities of this type of housing. As Saline mentioned, the building is limited to 3 stories with underground parking. It includes 2,375 feet of leasable retail space on the corner. And it's got a pedestrian-oriented design, including enhanced streetscape and public plaza at the corner. To allow this project, the applicant has requested a rezone to the RO district. A lot of the opponents have argued fundamentally that a rezone is not proper, that somehow we're unfairly changing the rules for this site. But in fact, when a site is redeveloping, that is the time it is incumbent on both the applicant and the city to look to the city's plans for what's expected here in the future. We're not measured against what is there now. And this site, in fact, is redeveloping. The landowner is selling the property. They have years of deferred maintenance on the apartment buildings. The Maverick building has been vacant for years. And as the new buyer, right from the outset, CDG has worked closely with the city planning staff to ensure that the proposed development reflects the city's future plans for this area. The city has already determined that RO is an appropriate zone for this site. The city designated this site as general mixed use in the future land use map and determined which zones are appropriate for mixed use, one of which is the RO zone. So that's already been decided. The next level of inquiry is whether this particular location warrants limitations on that new zone in the form of conditions on a development agreement. The applicant and the city staff have proposed various conditions to limit the height and the density, among other issues. When we examine the conditions of this site, its location, the surrounding infrastructure, the surrounding uses, both existing and planned in the future, and we examine additional comprehensive plan policies, we find that this site, in fact, is a great location for the proposed use at the density and the scale that's proposed and conditioned. First, it's a great location, immediately adjacent to the BSU campus, a half mile to the Greenbelt, and a half mile to the Vista Village Shopping Center, a half mile to Albertson's grocery store, 1.1 miles to the Boise Downtown Library. And this site has great pedestrian connectivity into the BSU campus. It's at the corner of a signalized intersection. There are sidewalks and bike lanes on both sides of the road. And as requested by BSU and the City Council during our last application process, the applicant has proposed an off-site pedestrian crossing at Joyce Street to increase safety for all area residents. Further support for denser development here. The site is at the intersection of two arterial roadways, and there is existing transit with a VRT bus stop on the property, which the applicant will improve with a new shelter and benches. The site is also just a few blocks away from the free BSU shuttle that circulates through the campus and downtown. Looking to your comprehensive plan, in addition to being a mixed-use area, the intersection of Boise and Protest is designated as a neighborhood activity center, which supports small-scale retail and higher-density residential within a quarter-mile radius. As staff has pointed out, the density range of a neighborhood activity center is 8 to 16 units per acre. But this neighborhood activity center, the Boise and Protest Activity Center, only has a current density of 5.7. The proposed project would add a small scale retail use to the neighborhood and bring the Boise Protest Activity Center up to a 7.1 density. Blueprint Boise also suggests that higher density residential uses should be concentrated at the core of the activity center and within a quarter-mile of transit. Consistent with this design principle, this site, along with the other corners of this intersection, is at the core of the activity center and is directly adjacent to an existing transit stop. Higher densities also support transit, which is why Blueprint Goal CC9 states that transit supportive development patterns are particularly important along transit corridors and within mixed-use activity centers where higher densities can be accommodated. The project design also incorporates many other principles from Blueprint Boise, including by providing improved access to transit facilities and improvements to pedestrian facilities, by providing underground parking, by designing the building close to the street, and by providing outdoor gathering spaces. The project, as conditioned in the DA, is also compatible with the surrounding development. The site is between commercial zoning at the corner and R2 to our west, providing a nice transition between the two zones. And on the other three corners around us are the BSU campus and the U district, an RO district, and R3. R1C borders to the south, but this neighborhood is 40 to 50 feet above the site. And our building is also set back approximately 70 feet from that property line. In addition to those surrounding zones, the built environment is also compatible and supports our design. The proposed building height at 3 stories is compatible with the surrounding development that ranges from 2 to 3 stories and up to 4 to 5 stories. Our uses of residential and retail are also compatible with the adjacent residential and commercial uses. So for all of these reasons, the proposed application to rezone the property to RO as conditioned by the DA is consistent with the comprehensive plan, is in the best interest of the public, and is compatible with the surrounding zoning and development. The project will provide needed housing in a location that supports denser housing development. And that denser development in turn will reduce the impact on the transportation system and support transit. The project also offers a commercial space, an outdoor gathering space, and improvements to the transit and pedestrian infrastructure serving the entire area. I want to address a few of the comments that have come up from the public in the public comment letters. First, traffic. Neighbors have suggested the site's traffic has never been fully studied, but it has. For the prior application, the applicant's traffic engineer prepared a TIS. ACHD requested additional studies as well, including a left turn lane warrant analysis for the project driveway. The traffic engineer did that study and also performed a synchro capacity analysis to determine whether the left turn lane would improve operations, and concluded a turn lane was not needed and may also be constrained due to the available right-of-way. ACHD in response issued a staff report last September with no site-specific conditions requiring any mitigation. ACHD also agreed a left turn lane for the driveway was not needed given the proximity to the signal at Beacon and Protest and the slowness of cars in that location. For this new application, again, the applicant prepared a TIS, updated now to include the new retail use, which is in the record and has been provided to ACHD again. The TIS again recommends no mitigation measures for the project. There was a slight change in the findings leading to this conclusion this time, though, and I need to clarify a statement that's in my letter dated February 4th, stating that all levels of service are met. The updated TIS concluded that all intersections meet ACHD's planning levels of service and all roadways, except the segment of Boise Avenue immediately in front of the site. The actual functionality of Boise Avenue overall is still a level B and a level C in the PM that are both well above the allowed levels of service of E for arterials, but ACHD has a planning threshold for this particular segment based on its design, the number of lanes and the fact that it doesn't have left turn lanes that lowers the threshold that they allow. So due to this finding, the traffic engineer again performed a synchro capacity study to see if that left turn lane would be helpful. The results again show the operations with and without the left turn lane are nearly identical. In other words, ACHD's planning threshold is lower for this segment because it doesn't have a left turn lane, but the additional study shows that it actually functions at an acceptable level of service without the lane. All the turn lane would do is change the applicable threshold measurement, not the operations. So for all of these reasons, the TIS again did not recommend any mitigation measures are necessary for this project. Parking, some neighbors have complained that the site has inadequate parking, but as Celine noted, we provide 15 more parking spaces than required and 222 more bike spaces than are required. We also will have many smart alternatives to transportation in a vehicle, such as car share, bike share, and scooter charging hubs. Neighbors have suggested that the site should be preserved as is for its historical value, but we did hire a historian last year to study this. And based on that study, SHPO determined that the project will not result in any impacts on historic properties. The applicant will preserve the historic marker for the Oregon Trail along the site's frontage. And finally, I'm going to turn it over to Brant here. I'll just mention that we agree with Celine's comments about the affordable housing. If we are accepted into that program with the council, for incentivizing affordable housing, then we will just substitute that condition for the program that we have already offered. With that, I'll turn it to Brant.
Great. Thank you, Deb. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for your time this evening. Collegiate Development Group, we're a small development company based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Currently have 17 employees. We develop student housing and multifamily housing across the country. Our team is fully committed to the City of Boise. The city approved our first project on Myrtle last year. We started construction about 3 weeks ago, and we plan on being part of this community for the long haul. We have several other projects that we are pursuing and are very, very passionate about being part of the Boise community. In addition, CDG has two really guiding principles. Number one is high quality design that is contextual with the market. As you can see in this depiction of some of our previous projects, every project is unique. Every project is different because we instruct our architects to really look at the context, look at the community, really understand what's going on around them before they put pencil to paper when they start designing our projects. And the second is being a good community partner. And we engage with the stakeholders, we meet with the interested parties, a lot of people, were required to do that. But one thing that I really take a lot of pride in is we listen. And not only do we listen, but we make changes. We incorporate some of those we incorporate the concerns of the community. And I think you'll see in a lot of the changes that I'll go over today, that there's been a lot of changes to our project, specifically driven by our commitment to being a good community partner. We've had many meetings with the neighbors, existing tenants, BSU, CENA, and of course, city staff, and we try to incorporate their input. And at the end of the day, I believe our project that we're proposing to you is better than what it was when we first. Want to go over a couple things. I know some of the council members or commissioners haven't seen the project, so I thought it'd be good just to go over some of the elevations. First, I believe our architect did a really good job, designing the building to be contextual with the neighborhood. We made an emphasis to ensure this was a very pedestrian-friendly design and layout. They did a good job. We believe they did a good job of pushing and pulling the facades to really create some nice articulation through either undulations of the building or different utilizing different materials and colors to break up the facade. Incorporated glazing on the main corner to give transparency from the street level. And as you can see, right on the street level, what you're seeing is on Boise Ave, we've incorporated some first floor walkouts. These weren't in our previous plan. We believe it helps increase the pedestrian friendliness of the building and creates a little more vibrancy at the street level. Another addition that we've done since the last presentation was we've added a community plaza, a neighborhood plaza onto the corner of Protest and Boise Ave. We feel like this will be a nice community amenity. And in addition, and I'll go over it in a second, we've added some neighborhood retail, about 2,400 square feet of neighborhood retail. Deb did a phenomenal job of describing why we believe our project should be approved and why it qualifies. One of the things I wanted to do is just sort of summarize some of the changes that have occurred since we last presented to you. So, one of the largest ones was we added some first floor retail. Let me go over this, make sure I cover everything. Yeah, and one of the main reasons for the retail was in conversations with the neighborhood. They really liked the old convenience store that was there. So the request was for maybe a bodega or a coffee shop. So we've added about 2,400 square feet of first floor retail. We've added the first floor walkout units and the community plaza to address some of the neighbors' concerns into how to improve their view and improve their experience. We've modified some of the following items. We've reduced this from 4 stories down to 3. We've changed our roof color from green to better blend in with the surrounding tree canopy. We've removed all of our condensing units from the roof just to improve the views that the neighbors up on the rim have, or the Mesa Vista neighbors, to reduce the view and to reduce the noise pollution. One of the other items that I think is really important to note is we've increased our rear setback by about 20 feet since our last submission. Now our building is about 70 feet off of our property line, but I think more importantly, it's at minimum 120 feet from the closest house on the Mesa Vista, in the Mesa Vista neighborhood. And I think we've significantly improved our solution for the current Rittenbaugh tenants. Our proposal currently provides them with about 5 years of rental assistance to maintain their current rental rates. And Saline did a really good job of going over that in detail. This was very important for us. We want to be very sympathetic to the conditions that we're impacting, and want to make sure that we're leaving these individuals in a better place than they are in today. So I think we've done a very good job of trying to put a tenant assistance package together that does that.
Time.
We can add 5 more minutes.
Really, I think that was really all that I had. Saline and the planning staff, I just wanted to thank you for all your help throughout this process. And we really look forward to developing and being a part of the community. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And actually, for the record, would you mind just saying your name and address? We didn't get that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. Brant Stiles with Collegiate Development Group, and it's 3000 Locust, St. Louis, Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Stiles. Okay, so next, I understand we have 2 neighborhood associations that would like to speak tonight. So let's split that 20 minutes and we'll do 10 minutes each. Starting with the Southeast Neighborhood Association and then the Depot Bench. I see Eric has his hand raised there. So Eric, just give us a moment while we switch you over.
Madam Chair, if I could ask whoever's attending for the Depot Bench for their hand to be raised so we can
Yeah,
bring
so we
them
can
over
make
at
sure
the
they're
same
here.
time.
Yeah, good point.
I
If
thought
you're
it was
here,
going to be Jim Pickett, but I don't see him online tonight.
okay, do we have somebody present representing the Depot Bench neighborhood? If not, that'll simplify it. Okay, so I'm still just seeing Southeast Neighborhood Association. Then, Eric, once you unmute here, you can start with your name and address, please. And it looks like you'll have the full time. We don't see that we have a representative from Depot Bench.
I shouldn't have to use it also. I'm Eric Berg, 1301 South Grant Ave, representing the Southeast Neighborhood Association. Chairwoman and Commissioners, living in one of the first areas south of the river to be developed with houses that date back to the 19th century, I'm constantly reminded how far-reaching the decisions made in development are. The successes of neighborhood centers often hinge on just a few projects, as their lifespan sets the course for the next 50 to 100 years for that area. The council and commission rightly decided to deny an almost identical project to the current one for that reason. It didn't fit the rules and the vision for the neighborhood and the city. When the city sees a situation that would not meet the standards of the code, it must stand firm. And when a new project does not address the deficiencies of the project, it must reject that as well. The Southeast Neighborhood Association voted unanimously to deny this project based on the fact that it does not meet the standards of the code and has not addressed the reasons for its previous denial. In the letter from Planning and Development Services denying the project on October 14, 2020, one of the major reasons was that the rezone request does not comply with the approval criteria. The letter rightly points out that RO is a zone utilized near dense commercial or dense residential, providing flexibility for transition zones. But none of that's really the case here. This is right next to R1 zoning, right next to R2 zoning. The only RO zoning is fairly new to the neighborhood, only had been inserted in the last 5 years. And that is a project that doesn't have any buildings up against it, surrounded by roads. This putting RO next to R1 and R2 and not R3 or commercial zoning is really pretty unprecedented. The RO simply doesn't fit the surrounding zones. In the letter, it said the proposed rezone is not in the best interest of the public conveyance or general welfare. And nothing really has changed since then to make that change. The letter also from the city addresses the lack of mixed use in this project. The project before you does not have or does have retail space where the previous one did not. However, the amount of retail space it has is approximately 1.1% of the total floor space, and that's not including the garage. If you include the garage as floor space, it's less than 1% of the overall project. Only 2,400 square feet is dedicated to retail. That's the size of a half court of a basketball court. A project that is 98.9% residential seems to hardly qualify for the term mixed use. Commercial is desperately needed in this area, as there is very little at the Neighborhood Activity Center currently. This project, in fact, would eliminate the commercial that exists in the former Maverick Station, which most convenience stores are about approximately 2,400 square feet, and replace it. So this project before you doesn't actually net any additional commercial to the neighborhood. SENA supports mixed-use developments and supports a healthy mix of uses, especially at these activity centers. This project simply does not meet the standard of a mixed-use project. Another reason for rejection of the previous project was the lack of diversity in housing types. The dominance of student-oriented housing, 4 to 5 bedroom dormitory style setup, was a concern of many the last go-around. And over the course of this process, the design which the applicant shows has changed, but it's largely remained dominant by this student-focused housing. The 4 designs that have been proposed have had approximately 20%, approximately 30%, approximately 27%, and approximately 22% of the beds that are in a more traditional apartment arrangement and not in a dormitory arrangement. Not only has the applicant not addressed this concern, the current proposal has only 22% of the beds in the non-dormitory arrangement, a full 5 percentage points less than when they previously came to you in the city. And the concern was that it was too dominated by student-oriented beds. So they've actually gone the wrong direction. The city was correct to reject the project on this basis of lack of diversity type. And the applicant not only did not address this issue, but made it worse, which is again grounds for rejection. And it is not that we don't want students in our neighborhood. By all means, we do. And we want diversity of housing types that allows people to live if they're a student, if they're someone who works in faculty, if they're someone like me who sells roofing. But at the end of the day, if you so dominate the place to the point where almost 80% of the beds are in a student-oriented fashion, you also have to ask yourself, is those 22% of beds that aren't likely to be rented by anyone who isn't? Finally, when it comes to the neighborhood activity center, this is likely our last chance to get this right. Identity that was recently built provides no mixed use. There's no public, commercial, or any other amenity to the neighborhood. The Eagle Point apartments are not likely to be redeveloped at any time in the foreseeable future, probably not even in my lifetime. And the only other corner is owned by Boise State, who understandably, due to their mission, doesn't really focus on mixed use in their development. This really is the last chance for us to get any mixed use or commercial along this corridor. Without a commitment to have mixed use in this development, the fate of the neighborhood activity center will likely be in name only. The good news is because of the hard work of the council and the commission, it doesn't have to be that way. This project is not the only thing that can be built here, and new tools that were recently approved, such as the housing bonus ordinance and pedestrian commercial zoning, could be utilized to build a project that is a true asset to the city and the neighborhood and the applicant. Variety of commercial spaces built underneath residential is a recipe that's worked in Boise for over a century. From Hyde Park to the buildings along Broadway to downtown or even the newer Bound Crossing, this is a formula that works. And SENA would love to work with the applicant and the city to figure out how to get an incredible variety of affordable housing, student housing, commercial, and traditional housing into this project in a form that works for everyone. The city made the right decision in rejecting the previous project. And because this project does not address the reasons for denial, we urge you to reject this project. Afterwards, we look forward to working with everyone to figure out a way to get a project that fulfills the city's standards and goals. Thank you. Open myself to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. So we will actually now move to questions from the applicant or for the applicant staff or for the neighborhood association, questions from the commission. Maybe while everybody's getting their thoughts together, I will kick it off. One of my concerns for this project has been the mixed use space and now the limited mixed use space. And this is a question for staff. Our comprehensive plan defines an activity center as an area that attracts people for shopping, work, school, recreation, and or socializing. So in my mind, I see that as, drawing people into the neighborhood from other neighborhoods. And I wonder how this fits into, how you see this fitting into that definition.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's a great question. I think the applicant would probably have some thoughts on it too. Activity centers are supposed to, bring the neighborhood into these centers and activate the space. I think there are a couple things going on at this activity center though. Boise State campus is definitely its own type of activity. And then you've got Broadway, which is nearby, and then downtown, which is certainly not only just a local activity center, but regional activity center. So while this is, categorized as a neighborhood activity center, there's certainly a lot of draw in other locations very close by. That's not to say that neighborhood commercial uses or retail uses aren't important in this area, but as the applicant mentioned, that Maverick site has been sitting vacant for quite some time. Them including that retail space, was a direction that council wanted them to go. If we wanted to discuss with the applicant providing more retail space, that's certainly something that you all can be asking questions of and getting the take from the applicant tonight.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I also weigh in on that?
Yes, please go ahead, Ms. Nelson.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess in addition to what Celine offered, I would make a few additional comments that your neighborhood activity center does entice people in and around into this area. A neighborhood activity center, though, is designed to have small scale retail. That's the terminology that's used in your comprehensive plan. It's not a regional destination. And I think the idea is that anything that's pedestrian friendly, neighborhood scale is appropriate. And not only do we have the BSU campus next door that creates its own, kind of center of activities, but we're close to all the other features that I described in my presentation. I think the way that we plug into that really well is by enhancing that pedestrian connectivity. So we've enhanced our frontage, we've provided off-site improvements, we're improving the transit that's in front of our site. And we have added that neighborhood scale commercial that is also going to provide a community gathering space. I think it was Mr. Rithman, one of the existing tenants, that wrote a nice comment letter and talked about how the Maverick, when it was being used to be the local gathering space for everybody to go have a cup of coffee. And that's the same kind of thing we heard from the neighbors at the council hearing, where they were asking for that gathering spot, either a market, bodega, or a coffee shop. That's the kind of scale they were looking for too. So we've provided that. We've been sensitive to the fact that we're not attracting new cars to be a destination commercial place, but we've provided neighborhood scale retail and all the pedestrian improvements that enhance that connectivity between our site and the neighboring sites.
Thank you. Yes, I'll go to Commissioner Gillespie next, please.
Thank you. This is a question for both the staff and the applicant. Mr. Berg in his testimony talked about the RO zone and basically argued that it doesn't fit in this particular area and with their surrounding zones. The city seems to feel otherwise in its staff report. I'll bet you Ms. Nelson does too. So I wondered if you could rebut that argument and talk about why you think the RO zone does fit in this particular spot. And if you could particularly tie in, the zoning and the facts pertinent to this exact site, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, it's a great question. We continue to have that conversation today. The RO zone is, as far as the approval criteria for a rezone, the RO zone is present in the neighborhood already across the street. I think it's a fair statement to say that the RO zone, just the RO zone, would be too intense and too much for this site, hence the inclusion of the development agreement. Technically the RO zone could go up to 65 feet if there wasn't residential nearby, and the density is 87 units per acre, and the proposal right now is at 53 units per acre, I believe, if I remember right. So we're not saying that the RO zone, just a blanket RO zone would be appropriate here, but the mechanism, you know, our code is outdated. We are going through a code rewrite right now. The RO zone gives us that wiggle room to increase density and provide more housing units within an area that desperately needs housing and is nearby several different amenities for several different folks. So that I think the development agreement essentially gives you those guardrails to make sure that we're not maxing out the site and that this specific project is before the commission. I'm sure the applicant would like to add.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie. So in addition to that, I just add, I mean, the purpose of the RO zone, one of the stated purposes is to allow higher density development of residential or office. And so it really is geared towards allowing that more intensity of use. And when you look at your comprehensive plan and you look at this area, this larger area that was designated as mixed use, general mixed use, the plan, the vision that the city had for this area along these arterial roads served by transit was that this would be a pretty big mixed use area. And the zones that the city has already determined are appropriate for that mixed use area include this RO zone that allows higher density. And, you know, when I tried to walk through all of your different comprehensive plan policies, what I was trying to do is show that it's not just the RO zone, it's not alone, that the policies as a whole are really gearing all that density towards the core of an activity center, where there is existing transit, where you have arterials, where there are pedestrian connectivity and improvements that are made. And all of the other features of the design that really meet those elements, the buildings right up to the street, the outdoor gathering space, all of those things really feed into why the RO zone works in this location. It was planned for, and the scale that's designed here works here. We do have RO directly across the street. We have R3 across the street that has very comparable design. We have a nice blend in between those two, between RO and R3, and then the R2 on the other side of us. We create that transition, and that's another purpose for the RO zone. It kind of creates a transition. It has become kind of a catch-all zone, as Celine mentioned. So I think that's, you know, in answer to your question, why is the RO zone appropriate here? Well, because you decided it was appropriate here when you planned it. And your comprehensive plan calls for the level of intensity and design that you see in our conditions of approval and with the project that's going into that zone. So I hope that answers your question, Commissioner.
Madam Chairman, just to follow up.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Gillespie.
So just to get on the record, so we're limiting the height of this zone by the development agreement to 35 feet. Can you discuss how that height limit relates to the R3 zone across the street and the R2 zone kind of kitty corner, and just how that 35 feet sort of factually relates to the other zones immediately in the area? Celine.
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to get my notes just to make sure I have this right. So Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, you're wanting to know the heights of the other zones?
Yeah, because I'm just looking at trying to understand, you know, because in a sense, we're really not recommending approval of the RO zone per se, because we're putting in a development agreement that basically cuts the height limitation in half, essentially. And I'm wondering how that relates to the R2 and R3 zones that are right in that area.
So Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, the R2 zone and the C1 zone are 35 feet height limits. The potential other zones that, you know, they could have potentially rezoned to were R3 and C2, which is 45 feet. And then potentially PC or pedestrian commercial, which would have been 50 feet.
Thank you. I'll let others have a chance now, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
Question for the city as well. Can she talk about, Saline, can you talk about the density as well for the R2 zone versus the or what's actually in this application? And I know it was in our packet, but I was a little bit confused exactly how it was broken down.
No, you're good. Madam Chair, Commissioner Finfrock. So in the packet, the current zoning as it is today is split between R2 and C1. And so in total, there could be, I have a slide, maybe that would help. Hold on. And you can see the numbers. Sorry, too much technology here. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so the density today with the R2 and C1D zones give you about 68 units. The proposed zone with just RO, just with no development agreement, no limiting factor, would be 87 units per acre, so that'd be 287 units. The proposed project is proposing 175 units. And then we look at these other zones that could potentially work in the area, and their maximum would be 143 units per acre. Or sorry, 143 units, 43 units per acre.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Finfrock.
So follow up to that. So the city did say that the reason that they did not approve the last project or the last application was because of the, hold on, I have it somewhere in my notes. I think they specifically said it was due to the incompatibility of the RO zoning. And so this project is different then because it actually now has a development agreement. Is that what, I mean, is it my understanding that that is what changed with this application? And of course, the height limitation and whatnot.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Finfrock, I'd have to see where you're reading from. I don't think it was ever stated that the RO zone specifically was incompatible. There was a development agreement attached to the last project. I believe the incompatibilities that council referenced was the mix of housing, as well as the density being a transition between the neighborhoods, between BSU and the rest of the neighborhood to the south. And let's see, I think I already said mix of housing, but the activity center was not being activated and that there needed to be a mix of uses, and that little attention was provided for pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and tree mitigation was not adequately addressed. So all of those things were why council eventually recommended denial or denied the project.
Okay. Thank you for that. I was a little unclear on that after I read through our packet.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
So while everyone's reloading, I'd like to ask Eric a quick question. So Eric, are you still there?
I am.
Hi. So in your presentation, you talked a lot about student-focused housing, and you used some percentages, and I was just wondering, what is your definition of student-focused housing, and how did you arrive at that? And then you used reference to number 22% based on that definition. Could you just sort of go through what you mean by student-oriented housing versus whatever the opposite is, please, and walk us through that math?
Yeah. So what I did was I looked at only the units in this project that were 4 or 5 bedroom per unit. Those are traditionally a dormitory style thing. We don't generally see many apartments that have, 4 or 5 bedrooms and 4 or 5 bathrooms. That is a dormitory style, student oriented, however you want to term it. So what I did is I took the total number of beds in the project and then took the number of beds that were in 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, because those are more traditionally, they're far more versatile parts of housing. And I just did a quick ratio. And if you do the math, it comes out to about 22% of the beds are in more traditional units versus in the dormitory style 4 and 5 bedroom units.
Madam Chairman, may I follow up?
Please, Commissioner Gillespie.
So Eric, just roughly how many, what's 22% of 22% of 175 is what? 38, 40 units are what you call traditional?
Well, I did it based on the number of beds, because at the end of the day, the number of beds is the number of people that you're going to have in the building. And so let's see, there's 575 or 545, right? Times 22. So there's approximately 120 beds that are not student oriented, and then 420 some odd beds that are. And you know, when you have those kind of ratios in an area, it does make it fairly likely that the rest of those beds will be filled by students as well, because you know 80% of the people living in the building are of that same demographic.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, may I also address that question?
Please go ahead, Ms. Nilsson.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Gillespie, I guess I would also note a few things to put this, the unit mix in context. The applicant could meet the zoning that's on the property now at 43.5 units per acre if they developed similar to more traditional student housing that just has 4 and 5 bedroom units. And so they're purposefully trying to create a mix that does appeal to a broader spectrum. And the fact that they are likely to attract student housing and are, you know, have the amenities that would be appealing to students is not surprising, given the demand, the unmet demand by students in this area, and the location being right next to BSU. It really is a great location to provide housing that would appeal to students, but it's also designed to appeal to others. With the walkout units in particular, that was a change designed to create a different access point, to create that streetscape presence, to allow and perhaps entice a different type of resident here. Now, they may still be a young worker or professional that works downtown, and so they like the environment that's created here, or they may be somebody that a professor or a traveling professor at BSU that needs some kind of short-term housing, that likes that proximity. But that was really what we heard from the council is they thought there was a good mix of housing, it seemed, but they wanted to see how it would appeal to others. And so that's really what this, the walkout allows us to do. So we're meeting the student housing demand. We're also meeting demand for other housing types and trying to create something that appeals to a variety of individuals looking for housing.
Madam Chairman, one last question for.
Yeah, Commissioner Gillespie.
So to the applicant or Eric or anyone, so how many, so there's 175 units in total. How many of the units are 1, 2, or 3 bedroom, what we are now calling in this discussion sort of traditional units? And I think that's in the packet, but it's not easy for me to toggle back and forth.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I'm not sure if that was for me or the applicant, but I have it handy. There's 25 studio apartments or units and 49 2-bed units, so that's 74 units. There are no 3-bed units proposed with this project.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
So we're adding 74 traditional units. How many units are in the current building that is proposed for removal?
There's, Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, there are, I believe, 23 units with 1 and 2 bedrooms.
So is my math correct in saying the proposal triples if we accept this traditional unit definition? We're getting 3 times as many, traditional units as are there now.
Commissioner Gillespie, your math is correct.
Thank you.
So this is, while we're maybe thinking of other questions, we did have our second neighborhood association join us. So I'm going to pause on the questions for just a few minutes while we move to Mr. Pickett from the Depot Bench, and I'm going to give him the same 10 minutes that that the Southeast Neighborhood Association used. So Jim will start with 10 minutes, and the commission will be able to ask questions again to staff, the applicant, and the neighborhood associations once he completes. So Jim, once you unmute here, please start with your name and address.
Madam Commissioner and Chair and other commissioners, I appreciate the time to talk to you this evening. I'm sorry for being late, had some technical difficulties. My name is Jim Pickett. I'm the treasurer for the Depot Bench Neighborhood Association. I've been involved with the Neighborhood Association for 15 years. My address is 3501 Windsor Drive, 83705. We've commented on both the on both opportunities on this, the first project and the second project, and have commented in both the planning and zoning by letter to the planning and zoning department and the city council in the past. And our previous letters, we've opposed this development in each of the prior designs. And this redesign doesn't seem to us to be dramatically different than other designs. And it has proved nothing really to change our opinion in requesting that the commission deny the rezone request. The developer has made some concessions from previous designs in terms of adding roughly 2,000 square feet of retail space, and some concessions to allow displaced residents the option to live in the new units if they would like. But we feel these changes are minor and do not address the bigger issues at hand. The retail space at 2,000 feet is 1% of the overall project. I would not consider that mixed use. That's just predominantly a token corner shop for coffee. We don't believe this definitely would not classify it in the neighborhood activity center concept. Additionally, after 3 years' time, the number of units that the low-cost units that are proposed in the project would be lost to Boise forever. Those would be gone. We doubt that the need for low-cost housing will magically disappear in that time frame. In fact, it will probably increase. Finally, the type of housing offered is not the type, is dramatically different from the type that they currently enjoy. I think that the age of the demographics of the current residents of the houses that would be displaced would not lead to being in the kind of environment that the new building would possess. The overall scale of the project from the previous designs are relatively unchanged, and which were the primary reasons for denial of the project. City Council and zoning rejected this RO zone as being compatible with the neighborhood residents. Nothing in the current design changes that incompatibility. It's not the kind of development really that was outlined in Blueprint Boise, and there's really no transition between this development and any of the houses to the west of the development. If the developer was really interested in the project and having it be an asset to Boise and the neighborhood, they would reach out to the neighborhoods affected and ask them how to make a more compatible project. We've received no such outreach. Again, we request Planning and Zoning Commission to deny this request for the same reasons that they have for previous iterations of this project, because basically it is the same project. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, great. So now, including Jim's testimony, we can ask questions to both neighborhoods, applicant, or staff if the commission still has remaining questions.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So question for staff, is there any sort of minimum for commercial and to be considered mixed use? I know seems like it's about 1% or less.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, there is no specific measurement of mixed use. I would note that the RO zone does allow for mixes of uses, even though they might be conditional or prohibited, just to make sure that there is some activation on the ground floor. And that's limited to 30%. The project is, I believe, just under 10% for that mix of use. Maybe I didn't calculate that right. I'm pretty sure that was right.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So 10% of the ground floor footprint as opposed to the gross, I guess.
The RO doesn't limit it by the ground floor. It's just intended. I guess it's inferred that those mix of uses would be on the ground floor.
Madam Chairman.
I'm going to let Commissioner Moore finish up, and then we'll go to Commissioner Gillespie.
So in the zoning code and blueprint Boise, I haven't really come across any reference to student housing. Is that referenced anywhere in the zoning code, as with the exception to portions of, I guess, the BSU master plan in the blueprint Boise?
Commissioner Moore, I just want to clarify, in my report, it does say providing less than 10% of the retail uses within the entire project. I just want to make sure that was clear for the record, that it was not 10%. As far as your question about whether student housing is addressed in our code, it is not. We do have provision in code that 5 unrelated individuals can be within a unit. But past that, we don't have definitions of student housing or dormitory. We did in our old code, but it's not as defined within our current code.
Thank you. I'll let Milt go ahead. Commissioner Gillespie.
Go ahead, Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you. Question for the city staff. So when and if this building comes, will it come back to us as a CUP if the RO zone goes through?
Commissioner Gillespie, no, it would not. This use would be allowed within the RO, and it would only require design review application.
Thank you. Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
I have a question for the applicant team. So would it be fatal to your proposal to increase, let's just say double the amount of retail space by eliminating a couple of those walk-up units that are on the short side of the building? I think there's 2 of them that go up Boise Ave, and to increase the amount of dedicated retail, say, to around 4,500 square feet. What are your thoughts on that?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, I'm going to let Brant stand up and answer that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, I think we'd be open to it as a condition of approval. What I will say is the retail environment has really changed over the last 10, 12 months. Based on what we believe is very marketable out there right now, we sort of see that 2,400 square feet broken up into really into 2 spaces, either 2 1,200 square foot spaces or 1,000 and a 1,400 square foot space. A typical Starbucks is about 1,200 square feet. So I think our goal is to make sure that it's marketable, and then it's active, and it increases vibrancy. I'm confident if it was 4,500 square feet, we would figure that out. What that would do is reduce some of those units, those walkout units that we think are really attractive to help increase vibrancy. But at the end of the day, if that's what the neighborhood wants and that's what the community wants, I think we can work with that.
I actually have a question for the neighborhood associations along those lines. What I know that we've talked a lot about mixed use, but so what would make you happy to see here? What would fit your criteria?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I think any additional retail over what's being proposed is certainly welcome. I know there have been other projects that have also had work live spaces where they have residential over the top of commercial that can be rented as a pair for small offices, small businesses, you know, kind of what they used to do on Broadway and Hyde Park back in the day. That especially is something we'd be very excited to see.
I would just, I'd second that. I think it would be, I think the idea there is that it would be a destination for not just the people coming out of the building, but could be a destination for others in the neighborhood, for dining or like, you know, coffee. There really isn't anything on that part of town for that kind of, there's Big Judd's and that's really it. Even a walk up, you know, even a walk-in C-store, like you know, with the bodegas downtown, would be amenable. Something that people could in the area could use, that would be more than just for what is essentially going to be 500 students.
Thank you. I guess one last question for the neighborhoods that I have. If we were to add more retail and then the developer wanted to push those units higher, would you trade off more retail down below for a taller project?
Madam Chair, commissioners, I mean, I would have to, you know, kind of see what that would look like, where the height would be added. You know, so I mean, it's not something that we would be, you know, 100% dead set against, but it's kind of devil in the details with that kind of thing.
Okay. Mr. Pickett, did you have a different response to that?
No, we would probably be more against it, since our neighborhood, you know, there are residents on the rim that are directly impacted by the height, an additional height for sure.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions from our commission?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
just to shift gears a little bit, and talk about some of the stuff from the late correspondence. It looked like some of the buildings bridged over the top of that drain. Is that currently allowed by the drain authority?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Moore, the current drain would be relocated to the rear of the property. And that's where they show a path on the landscape plan plus some bicycle parking in the back. So I don't believe, the applicant can confirm, but I don't believe the drain is, or that there is a building on top of the drain, because there will need to be easements for access and maintenance.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore. Oh, and then was this in regards to the same question, Ms. Nelson?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear from you and then I'll loop back to Commissioner Moore.
Just very, very quickly, Commissioner Moore, that is the current condition, but it would not be allowed today. It's actually quite unsafe, and the building is kind of crumbling into the drain. And so we've been working closely with the drainage district to improve that condition by relocating it and piping it, and they've been supportive of that effort. And so that current condition couldn't be repeated like that.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
That answered my question.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Seeing no more questions, we'll now move to public testimony. We do have a handful of people that signed up, but I think what would be helpful is just to, if you're interested in speaking on this item at all tonight, please virtually raise your hand. And we will begin to make our way down the list, and then I will cross off people on my list up here as I see them. So again, once we call on you, we'll start with Monica Fabi up here, Fabi, at the top of my list. And please start with your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. So again, if you're interested in speaking on this item tonight, please virtually raise your hand and we'll begin to make our way down the list. Monica, it looks like you are muted. So once you're unmuted, please start with the name and address again, and you're good to go. Monica, I think you're still muted, it looks like.
All right, I think I figured out how to unmute myself.
Great.
My name is Monica Fabi. I'm with Intermountain Fair Housing Council. We have, my address is 630 South Curtis Road, Boise, Idaho. And I am, we have, Intermountain Fair Housing Council has commented in the other iterations of this, but I understand that they no longer exist on this record. And so we'd like to go on the record to say that although we need student housing, the demolition and displacement of an existing community, the Brassey apartment residence or the Reidenbaugh residence, is unacceptable and contrary to Blueprint Boise and the city's fair housing plan. The demolition and displacement of these families exacerbates the need for more affordable housing in Boise, including affordable housing for students. We welcome the city and BSU being part of the solution with CDG and the neighbors to save this affordable housing while creating new configuration and or location for the CDG student development on the property or on property near BSU or on BSU or the city's property without displacement of residents and demolition of affordable housing. The city, a lending program, and or the neighbors could also help the Brassey residents buy their complex in some fashion to preserve it as affordable housing as a cooperative. The Boise City BSU, oh damn it, in their student project at a new location configuration, as not all students can afford the rent, nor can community members. Students and community members are facing huge debt, and it has only been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Unaffordable housing will make it worse. The Brassey tenants range in age from 1.5 years to over 90 years and include families with children, veterans with disabilities. The city of Boise was able to resolve the Blue Valley Mobile Home Park, the Atlasta Mobile Home Park, and now known as Melody Thornton. Residents continue resident situations in this fashion, and it's time to do so again. It is important that we undo our systematic use of planning and zoning to discriminate via gentrification, displacement, urban renewal, and the like. Please check out, well, we can send you an article. We recommend that the city engage in a collaborative resolution in this matter. We ask that you also address the process concerns of the Reidenbaugh residents regarding this hearing. And I think it's important to realize that we talk about all these spaces and what size they are and what shape they are and how this physical space is that physical space. But the bottom line is this is really about people. This is about a group of people who've had a place to live and the people who would normally move into those places as these people move out, who won't be able to utilize the space the way it is existing right now. This is perfect housing for people who might be in otherwise high density difficulty managing that sort of situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Great. So next we'll move to Sean Garrettson. Once you unmute, Sean, please start with your name and address, and you'll have the 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Sean Garrett. I'm going to share my screen real quick as well. Give me 1 second. Okay, great. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
My name is Sean Garrettson. I live at 2805 Windsor Road in Austin, Texas. I'm speaking tonight representing the landowners immediately above the site up on the bench, who definitely would be opposed to an increased height with commercial, by the way. So I'm a consultant. I work all over the country. I write a lot of comprehensive plans, land development codes, and I've done a lot of work up in that area. Very familiar with this project. I've testified several times. And we recommend denying on 2 points. The first one, from a formality perspective, I don't believe The applicant should have been able to resubmit until after October 6, 2021. And then the second one, and I think what you've heard already, is that it still does not conform with the comprehensive plan, and the amount of commercial space that they have is a very paltry amount for what is deemed as an activity center in the comprehensive plan. Now, I appreciate what the applicant said about being a community member. I do not doubt that at all, but they weren't part of the community when the comprehensive plan was created. And that, I think, is one of the most important things for the Planning Commission. This is your document to help manage, is that a lot of testimony, a lot of community input went into that comprehensive plan, and this identification of an activity center at this location, it had a lot of connotation to that, that designation by the community. And the amount, the 2,375 square feet of retail space, calling that mixed use, it is a little absurd. In all the mixed use development that I've seen, generally you see requirements of the city requiring that for that type of a mixed use designation, that at a minimum 50% of all the ground floor space is used for retail. This is 1% of all of the space entirety is devoted to commercial. It is just not enough space. And I think one of the gentlemen suggesting a utilization of the residential units for live work space, specifically for artists. I've seen that work very, very well in a lot of communities, and they might not lose any of those residential units. I think that can be a really good option. But this idea of an activity center, I think you really need to understand that this is the only option left in that whole area as a redevelopment opportunity to create an activity center that is more than just a small coffee shop or 3 spaces that can be put into a 2,400 square foot space, as a developer said. This is meant as an area that is a gathering place for more than just the residents of that space or residents across the street, but more from across that neighborhood. Lastly, I want to just say on the housing, we do a lot of affordable housing. We got the President's Award from Urban Land Institute last year for a project we did here in Austin, and we write affordable housing. I'm just going to say that.
Gerritsen, that's the end of the 3 minutes, unfortunately. Okay, next we'll hear from Dixie Dykeman. Just give us a moment while we.
Madam Chair.
Oh, it looks like we have Ryan queued up. Sorry. We'll move to Ryan Armbuster. Please start with your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes once you unmute.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. My name is Ryan Armbruster with Elam and Burke, attorneys at law, P.O. Box 1539, Boise, Idaho 83701. We represent Ada County Drainage District number 3. As is stated in the staff report, our facility, referenced as Drain A, traverses through the project site. To answer a question that was posed just recently, the current drain does traverse through the existing housing project. That would not be allowed today. The plan is submitted by the applicant, realigns, relocates, and pipes the facility at the edge of the property site. We've submitted a number of pieces of information and material to the commission concerning our authority and our ability to work with the developer. We've continued to have discussions concerning the formal agreement with them, and dependent upon land use approval and final drainage plans and specifications presented to the district board. We've reviewed the new concept, and we believe it is a good project in that regard. We don't make decisions on land use, but we are reaffirming our authority to consider and approve the realignment, relocation, and improvement of Drain A as it traverses through the property. We look forward to the prospect of a new drainage facility which will update and improve the current drainage facility conditions on the property. We will continue to move forward with further discussions with the applicant to comply with remaining conditions and specifications contained in a future drainage agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So next we'll hear from Dixie. And quick question, Dixie, before you get started, it looks like you maybe have two people lined up to testify. Is that correct? I think you're still muted.
Yes, my husband and I.
Okay, great. If you would like to kick it off, start please with your name and address, and then you'll have your 3 minutes, and then feel free to pass on to your husband, and he can do the same if you'd like.
Well, he's in another area.
Okay, we'll
Okay.
just get to him then later on in the list.
So am I live or are you just showing this picture of Alan and I?
You are, I don't see your video, but we do have your audio going.
Yeah. Okay. So there's no video.
No.
Weird. Okay. Well, my name is Dixie Dykeman. Good evening. I live at 5 Mesa Vista Drive, and it's about 50 feet away from this proposed project. I'm in complete opposition to this project and have been for the same reasons I was last year at this same time. The developers and their team are attempting to increase the land value and profitability by millions at our expense. We neighbors thought when we bought our homes, however long ago, we had an idea of what could be built near us. Now we are seeing the rules change. This land deal no doubt offers the owners a very high sale price, but this dormitory project is very wrong for this neighborhood. I had written a lot about the residential office zoning change and about Blueprint Boise, but that's all been covered. And I think the council people will be able to make their own decision on that. These parcels of land represent the last chance the neighborhood and city have of fulfilling the promise of mixed use in this location as it was laid out in Blueprint Boise. Let's consider a neighborhood specific area plan focused on this area. Let's consider affordability for students and others who struggle financially. Even Mayor McLean stated in the meeting in October 2020 that this site is too valuable to quickly build without thoughtful consideration and mixed living models. Please consider the impact of your decision in terms of the residents of the lots being discussed for demolition, rezone, and replacement. Let's use some forward thinking with regard to affordability and inclusivity of these residents that serves to make Boise more accessible, more affordable, and more inclusive, not less. Please say no to this project and this rezone request and wait for a proposal that fits a collective vision for this corner. Let's not rush to conclusions. I know money talks, and there's a lot of it to be made on this project. The opinions of longtime Boise residents hopefully will not be overlooked to accommodate those whom don't yet live here and those who stand to profit considerably from your decisions. This proposed monstrosity is not an improvement. Please do not approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll next hear from Bart Chaffee. And also it looks like maybe there are two people there. So if you want to each take your 3 minutes and start with your name and address, each of you, that works for us. You're still muted right now though. So once you unmute, each of you will have 3 minutes, and please start each of you separately with your name and address.
Bart Chaffee at 3 South Mesa Vista Drive. And is that?
Yeah, that's good. Go ahead, please, Mr. Chaffee, with for your 3 minutes.
Okay. I guess one of the things that as I listened to the presentations, one of the things I'm wondering is how many people have actually walked the grounds of the property to get a realization of what type of property this represents. To me, it's an invaluable piece of property, and it could be such that it could be positive for the community. This is historic. I know that it said it's not historically, but there have been 8 or 10 different industries that started in this property for the city of Boise and were very important in its upbringing. Another thing that I wanted to address, as far as the fact, I've addressed several of these in my letter to you, but is the fact of the traffic. Traffic, when I say traffic, I'm talking about traffic, motor traffic, pedestrian traffic, and bicycle traffic. Anybody that's ridden a bicycle or walked along Boise Avenue as it currently exists can recognize what a chance you take as you travel along those roads, because the bicycle lanes are narrow and the traffic is there. The other thing is the fact that the traffic, it's minimally looked at by our police presence, and the residents of the Boise apartments have actually got video of people passing on Boise Avenue at excessive speed, and the entire length of Boise Avenue from Protest to Capitol Boulevard. There's parking on the sides of the road that are illegally parked at present, let alone you add this number of people. The other thing considered me as far as the fact of the safety of people, regardless of how they go back and forth between the university, you're putting that many people, particularly students, that will be talking or think that they can run across the road, be safely. You're putting that at risk in this project. I think the other things that's happened is there's a lot of things that have been addressed as far as the fact of, like the unstable hillside, as such they're talking about planning, but I don't know that that's actually, a lot of these things are put in writing. And if we don't have those things in writing, then I'm not sure what basis we have for enforcing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chafee. And that's the end of our 3 minutes.
Are you ready?
Yes, whenever you're ready, please start
Okay.
with your name and address.
I am Leanne Chafee, and I live at 3 South Mesa Vista Drive. I've been here for about 30 years. I have written a letter, and I have, I want to highlight those. I am trying to figure out why this project got a new project number. Seems like a do-over, and you don't do those things. One, I don't believe there's a market for another 550 plus beds. I think some of their numbers did not include the current housing that is directed towards students. I am concerned because the concepts right now are simply concepts, and there's nothing that says it can't change. And there's things that about bike lanes and things like that that I think are changeable. I want to point out that with 500 students living there, if every student just went across Boise Avenue one time, that's 1,000 crossings per day. And the likelihood is they would go back and forth more times than that. This is directed at a luxury student housing is how they have marketed their other housing things. And it is going to be expensive. I do believe that when they talk about a family being able to live there, if a family of 4 wanted to live in an apartment that would have a bedroom for each person, that would be $3,200 a month. And I do not believe that a family would choose to spend that much and live in a student housing. When it comes to retail space, it is only 1%, and it doesn't address the things that even the Maverick had. It doesn't have the groceries, doesn't have gas, doesn't have a place to park, et cetera, et cetera. They have said that they will put 500 bike racks for 500 bikes in the back. That's a minimum of 50 bike racks with 10 bikes apiece. What happens if they don't, if they can't rent the ones that open up onto Boise Avenue, become an Airbnb? Another item, I think that what has been, yes, they have made changes. I think what has happened has been minimal changes to meet what you've required of them. I think it is directed toward a singular type of student. I wonder if how many of these would be available for students with disabilities, wheelchairs, all those kinds of things that need special accommodations. I agree that the street side parking will be tremendous. They don't want to pay for it, and they won't. Garbage containment is a concern of mine. I think this takes away from the possibilities of a neighborhood activity center. I think it destroys natural habitat. Deer cannot graze on asphalt. Said they would try to do as many trees as possible, but once you remove a 100-year-old tree, it takes another 100 years to grow. I don't believe it is in the keeping with the houses in the neighborhood.
Unfortunately, Ms. Chafee, that's the end of our 3 minutes as written in the code. So next we'll hear from Pam Romer. Please unmute when you're ready and start with your name and address.
Hi, Celine. Are you able to pull up my presentation?
Yep, sure am.
Thank you very much. I hope I don't forget to say next.
Don't forget your name and address.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Pam Romer. I live at 2001 West Boise Avenue, number 8. I'm opposed to the rezone at 1909 and 2001 West Boise Avenue. Next. This same project, as proposed less than a year ago, will still destroy open space and mature tree canopy at West Boise Avenue community. Next. This is the old plan with the 4th story in the back and 2 courtyards. This project overwhelms the area. Next. This is the new plan, which is still the same massive, overwhelming project. The new plans are still renting by the bedroom, promoting use for students and BSU faculty and grad students. The bedroom count has increased by 10 from last year's P&Z hearing in February to 547 bedrooms. There is no adaptability in the plans as recommended by the mayor in last year's City Council September hearing. Same safety issues as discussed in last year's hearings. Still waiting to hear about BSU's master plan and how they will address their housing responsibilities. Next. This is not a regional use. It is a neighborhood activity center. Where is the mixed use? A mix of the number of bedrooms in a unit is not a mixed use. Our neighborhood activity center will become a student housing density center. Next. Protest Boise Avenue is a designated neighborhood activity center. The community would like to see a vibrant mixed use that would be as wonderful or more so than Bowen Crossing. The next 3 slides will show the previous September plans on the left and the current plans on the right. Ground floor. 6 front-facing 2-bedroom units have been added. Retail space that is not much larger than Big Judd's has been included. Possible 2 shops, perhaps turning a tenant coffee bar into a public coffee shop, and don't know something else. 1 courtyard has narrowed. CDG may have decreased the number of units, but the number of bedrooms has been steadily increasing. Next. The plans for the 2nd and 3rd floor are not much different. A few bedrooms recombined to allow for a higher count. Next. The current plan shows 2 more cars added below. Where are the 18 allotted spots for guest parking to be located since there are only 8 temporary spots at street level? Next. Major safety issues. Where is the access for a fire lane? Where is the access for the hillside sewage lines? How will student vehicles be kept out of Big Judd's parking lot? Next. According to the Oregon Trail Parkway Plan introduction, this plan provides a means of protecting Boise Avenue and surrounding neighborhoods as historical resources and enhancing the cultural and aesthetic values of the street. Next. Our mature, majestic trees, so calming, so cooling, so refreshing, and home to so many critters. Next, the courtyard at Riddenbaugh Place Apartments, a great place to play croquet, gather for family and community functions, a great place to relax from the world, especially with social distancing. Thank you. Thank you, Celine.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, again, if you are hoping to testify on this item tonight, please virtually raise your hand. We're going to take a 5-minute break now, so we'll be back at about 6 after and pick it up then. Maybe we'll start next with Ginny Lake. I see that as the top of my list. Okay, we are back. So, yes, go ahead and start. Jenny, we'll have 3 minutes. Please start with your name and address.
Okay, my name is Jenny Eglin-Like, and I live at 26 Mesa Vista Drive. To be honest, I'm not sure why this project is yet again up for consideration by planning and zoning when the new proposed changes are so minimal. The proposal is basically the same. CDG has made the smallest of revisions to try to push through what is a massive housing development that is much too large in scope for our existing Boise neighborhood and community. Adding in a dormitory that houses 547 people is a parking catastrophe waiting to happen. You only have to look at the Identity building that sits directly across the street, that is half the size of the CDG proposed development, to see what the future of this neighborhood holds should this project be approved. Identity houses 295 residents. CDG's proposed development will house 547 residents, 252 more people than the Identity building. I encourage you to drive to the Identity building one evening around 8 p.m. and you will see cars lined up and down the street, some illegally parked. I was actually at Cricket's, which is a bar that sits across from the street from Identity, and the employees were telling me that they rent out 6 of their parking spaces to Identity residents, and their parking lot still overflows with Identity residents' cars. The employee told me that they have to call the tow truck to tow the cars out of the parking lot frequently. This is not a neighborhood that is prepared for 547 new residents. While Identity has paid parking available for their residents, similar to what CDG is proposing, the majority of those residents choose to not pay the monthly parking fees and choose to cram their cars into the streets surrounding Identity instead, which is exactly what will happen with the CDG development. Boise Avenue and the surrounding neighborhoods do not have the capacity to hold these parked cars. CDG is proposing 267 parking spaces for their 547 residents. They are suggesting that 280 residents will not need a space to park a car. If this is what they think, they are out of touch with a college student's lifestyle. BSU students have cars. To try to push the narrative that most residents will walk or ride a bike is not reasonable. And again, you only need to look at the Identity building to see that this is not true. Please consider the people, the community, the existing homes and businesses in this neighborhood, and the current existing challenges. Adding a 547-person dormitory to a parcel of land that is much too small and a neighborhood that is already experiencing major parking issues will make an already existing problem much worse. One final note. During this entire process, CDG, an out-of-state developer, has had what appears to be a Boise City advocate in their corner. The Boise City planning manager has promoted and advocated for CDG. I believe that the citizens of Boise that are in opposition to this project should have also had a city advocate to help them along in the process, much like the planning manager has helped and advocated for CDG. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Terry Koppel. Once you unmute, please start again with your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Terry Koppel. I'm an attorney. My address is 199 North Capitol Boulevard, Suite 600, and I'm here testifying on behalf of the opponents to this project who live on Mesa Vista Drive, right on the bench above this project. What I want to discuss with you is specifically the traffic impact study. This morning, I spoke with Mindy Wallace. She is the planning review supervisor for ACHD. She advised that she received the traffic impact study from the applicant 2 weeks ago, that this is a totally an inadequate amount of time for ACHD to even begin a review of that traffic impact study as it affects this area of Boise. So the applicant has had enough time since the denial of the last application in October of 2020 to come up with a traffic impact study that ACHD would have time to study and analyze. Now, the commission may remember that the same thing happened on the prior application. An updated traffic impact study was delivered to P&Z and to ACHD 6 days before the February 10th, 2020 hearing that we had. And again, an inadequate opportunity for ACHD to analyze it. They also pulled their conditional use application which meant that ACHD would not be able to do a site-specific analysis of this project, given that it was on Boise Avenue and where there's all kinds of parking problems and other traffic issues. So what has happened is that despite ACHD's concerns and actual desire to want to be able to do a detailed analysis of this project, that has not occurred because of how this has come down. Now, back on that February 10th hearing, Commissioner Gillespie hit the nail on the head when it came to the traffic impact study, because he noted, and I'm just reading from the transcript, he stated, "So how can I approve something that has, 527 bedrooms, dropped smack in the middle of Boise with no ACHD report at all? So I'm just really struggling with dealing with this just as a straight rezone." Then Commissioner Stevens even noted that this was not a proper review because you need to have a site-specific evaluation from ACHD. When that issue came up on February 10th, staff said, well, what you would need to do is to have the developer file for a different rezone, an R3, an R2, maybe a C1 or a C2 with a conditional use permit. And in that way, ACHD can do a detailed, highly sophisticated analysis of the traffic impact study and provide the Planning and Zoning Commission with their best advice with regard to this project. So that's what we're urging you to do, is either defer it, deny it, or have the developer redo it so we have a conditional use permit process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, next we'll hear from Jody Hull. Please, again, state your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jody Hull, and I live at 7916 West Queen Court. And like a few people have brought up before, I'm going to speak more to the environment that this lot is, or this property is in right now. Currently, it's covered by a lot of mature trees, as you see, and a big swath of lawn. And I'm seeing this all over Boise now, it's going to be replaced with a lot of asphalt and a lot of rooftops. And I don't think that just requiring some of the trees to be placed 2 miles away, brand new trees, is going to mitigate the loss of this habitat. And there's been a lot of talk about the drain, and it's really not exactly just a drain. It is part of the old Boise Canal system. It's a historic ditch that was part of the mill ditch, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but it provides water and wildlife habitat to that lot. Maybe not in the way it should be safety wise, but the new development does not replace this kind of habitat. This is not a blank lot out on a flat part of Boise. This is a very unique property along the Boise, the old Boise, or Boise Avenue, which is the old Oregon Trail. And this kind of dense project does not pay homage to our pioneer ancestors who came down that dusty trail at one time. And replacing and tiling the ditch, not being able to replace those mature trees. This is not a typical residential lot, and it will displace, like we've heard, 25 units that are technically, 50 years old. So they could potentially be listed as historic. So, and then like some of the other people brought up the traffic, having 500 students cross the narrow Boise Avenue twice a day is quite a number of people walking. And, we can't use the identity building like it's been brought up as an example, because I don't know how that got approved in this neighborhood either, because it does have narrow roads, not a lot of parking, very dense, tall development that just, it's the same thing. It does not pay homage to the historic nature of this area. And, the developer said that they've worked with the designers, the architects, but, what you're seeing as proposed is just another box, like it's been built all across the country, paint some of the walls a different colored, little undulations, but it's not architecturally unique. And it doesn't really fit in with some of the neighborhood's really a cottage neighborhood of working class people. And now it's going to look like an urban street in downtown Boise. So along a very narrow Boise Avenue, which was not designed to carry as much traffic as it is right now. So I urge you to do some of the considerations of a different kind of zoning with conditional use or other options for this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hull. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Dykman. Please start with your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes. You'll have to unmute first.
Hello, I'm Al Neichman, 5 Mesa Vista Drive. We purchased our home in 1984. We invested substantial funds and thousands of hours improving it over years. Mesa Vista is not unlike Houston Boulevard or Crescent Rim. It's a special place. In a report prepared by the Idaho Land and Appraisal, the market value of our property within our subdivision and also other homes along Boise Avenue and the townhouses next to this massive project will drop in value from 10 to 15%. Neighborhoods on Boise Avenue should be the line for high density projects like this. Nothing should be built that destroys our neighborhoods. We need to protect our neighborhoods. We need to keep the zoning as is. We should not make any zoning changes, period. Parking and traffic is a huge problem. Students in Boise State are a little different. They seem to own their own cars. You need a parking space for each bed. If you don't, it's a big problem. BSU has 7,000 backup parking spots for their dorms. This project has 547 beds and 277 parking spots. That's only a 0.49 parking spots per bed. It just won't work. So there's 547 people. Where are their friends, visitors, family going to park? How do they get around when it snows on the ground? There's no place except the neighborhoods to park, and there's no place in the neighborhoods to park, period. Ask the neighbors at Identity. The project is direct competition to BSU, but BSU inherits all the problems: the parking, the noise, the litter, and the partying. It's a well-known fact that students do better on campus housing, both in grades and graduation rates. Boise State has a 550-room dorm planned on campus, and that is what their future needs show. If everything goes back to normal and can be 1 student per room, student housing, right now we're 1 student per room. Student housing is not the main problem, according to Boise State, but the main problem is housing for faculty and university staff. The land needs to be developed like Woodbridge townhouses next door. That would make everybody happy. ACHD knows the problem with traffic on Boise Avenue. They're just trying to be nice. It's not even safe to ride a bike down Boise Avenue. I've done it. It's a very narrow street, and at times it's blocked from Capitol Broadway. The revision of this project has made no significant changes to the original design, just added more beds and a new case study. This project has been denied 2 times. Please say no to any kind of rezoning, especially that 42 feet when it should be 35. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dakeman. We have one note that's going to be read into the record. Saleen, go ahead.
Madam Chair, this is from Tammy McMillan. Sorry, I don't have her address. I can ask for that and put that in the record later. She wasn't able to attend tonight and missed the late correspondence deadline, was having some trouble with Zoom. So her comments read, since school started 3 weeks ago, I live on the front apartment. Early in the morning when the school bus comes to pick up kids, has its lights on and the stop sign out, and cars are passing that stop sign, disregarding even by the law, and people are speeding up and down the road. Also, they just wiped out the corner pull a protest in Boise Avenue, and they were working on that for hours. I just totally disagree on this project, and I think it needs to be declined for the simple fact that it's a safety hazard for just not the children, it's for the community in our area and our neighborhood. My husband is a veteran disabled, and I can't find low-income housing for disabled veterans. That's all I really want to say. Thank you for sharing my testimony.
Thank you. So we'll move on to Ms. DeCaires next, but then I'm going to go to the phone number that's called in, ending in 9701. And I don't see any other hands raised. So unless we get some more up, that will be the end. Okay, Ms. DeCaire, please start with your name and address once you unmute. Lori, are you there? Oh, yep, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I guess there's no video, huh?
You can turn your video on if you'd like. We will see you.
I'll do that. Hold on. I'll start video. Okay. Just so you know, the 9701 is also me. I just called in case this doesn't work, that I can jump on my phone. So, okay. We are in the midst of a nationwide housing affordability crisis. Idaho just made the New York Times yesterday for having the highest rent increase in the country at 12%. We can't build our way out of a housing crisis. When speculators destabilize our housing market, we all pay a high price in lost productivity, stress-related illness, hospital visits, and public services to compensate for the loss of community when a neighborhood is erased. When outside private equity like CDG operates Boise's rental housing by remote control, that rent stream is siphoned out of Boise's economy and sent to St. Louis or wherever that corporation and its shareholders are based. In this case, approximately $4 million a year that would otherwise circulate through local businesses will be lost to our economy. When proposed development requires an amendment of the zoning ordinance law, it is Boise's responsibility to drive a hard bargain in the public's best interest. In this case, affordable housing in exchange for allowing more density for a developer, particularly in this scenario where the development proposes demolition of 25 sound, habitable, and naturally occurring affordable units. According to Boise's zoning code, rezone should only be granted if it is in the public good. Is it in the best interest of the public convenience and general welfare? Being a strong property rights state, Idaho's Supreme Court has upheld the power of land use agencies to maintain existing zoning. So the city is starting from a sound bargaining position to get an exaction. There's legal precedent from right here in the Treasure Valley as ACHD regularly uses exactions with developers to get public facilities before granting their approval, like sidewalks, roundabouts, intersection widening, etc. The city should hold firm on a no net loss of affordable housing policy and make the following three requirements. A 1-for-1 replacement of housing affordable to someone making 60% AMI or less for 30 years. This defaulting to the housing bonus will mean we get even less housing. So we're talking about 10 units at 100% AMI. That's not affordable. So I don't think that if there's changes made to it, that it should default to the housing bonus standard. We should keep it at the 60% that CDG is originally proposing. A generous relocation package for people who are being displaced and potentially being made homeless. And we should ensure that the new building is equitable and mixed income while helping Boise's affordability crisis by requiring the owners to accept Section 8 vouchers. Where the city has played a role in incentivizing gentrification and the desire of developers to build high-end housing, the city needs to put its fingers on the scale for housing that is chronically underproduced, that which is 0 to 60% AMI, or housing which is affordable for people making less than $20 an hour. I urge you to deny this project as it stands right now.
Thank you so much, Lori. Would you mind just saying your name and address for the record?
Lori DeCare, 7154 West State Street, number 148.
Thank you. Great. Next, we'll move to Ed McCluskey. Please start with your name and address as soon as you're ready.
Well, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
It always feels like a Verizon ad, the old one. I'm Ed McCluskey. I'm a resident at 1919 Vernal Lane. I'm a professor emeritus at BSU, and I've been a professor living among students since 1974 when I earned my PhD, and of course lived as a student long before that, as I'm sure Commissioner Blanchard might relate to at least. In any event, I just want to say a couple things. I don't want to repeat a lot of the other stuff. Commissioner Gillespie asked, even though in response others have said, we have nothing in the code that says specifically student housing. But you did ask the question, what is student housing? And I'd say there are a couple of signs of that. The major one is renting by the bed, which is what's going on here. Most of these units will be rented by the bed. That's dormitory renting. And if you don't want to call it student housing, call it something else that went out of the code, I would say prematurely. And that is, call it a boarding house, because that's what's going on here. The more important issue for me that is left, though, is the lack of reflection. That's different from marketing research. The lack of reflection over what to do with an area of the city. I'm also a member of the board of CENA, but I'm also a member of a work group for the Collegiate subdivision, which is right across the street from where this thing is planned to be. And in that work group, we have had, 3 meetings with a consultant, and we still have another meeting next month to decide what to do with the character of the neighborhood around here. That's a big plus considering what happened with the master plan of 2015. That master plan is under discussion by Boise State. It's not as fixed in stone as people like to say. So we're in the process of trying to make some decisions. And if you want to say, well, that's on the other side of Boise Avenue and has no relation to what's going on at the CDG project, I would just refer you to what everyone else has said about the increased amount of foot traffic, auto traffic, and so forth that already plagues this area. Final point. I guess if you say it enough times in your marketing research, whether you're BSU or CDG, we have exponential growth of students going on. What nobody seems to really stress is the fact that even post-pandemic, we are seeing reductions here, regionally and nationwide, with very few exceptions, of student, quote, needs for housing on brick and mortar territories. We're seeing more and more virtual teaching. And I think most professors know about that. A regular reader of the Chronicle of Higher Ed will be able to tell you that. In any event, that's all I have for now, but this is not a needed project for students. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McCluskey. Next, we'll hear from Daniel Rollinger. Please unmute when you're ready and start with your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Dan Rollinger. I reside at 6 South Mesa Vista Drive, Boise, 83705. You know, it's hard to discuss this again because it's really the same project. We have 1% kind of a community center coffee shop, but nothing else really has changed in the project. And I think the community is not saying that we oppose a project or we oppose infill or that there's a need for housing in Boise. We all understand that need. What we're saying really is that we need a project in this area that supports the community. And I mean the surrounding community of this neighborhood. What this project really should do is create a diverse neighborhood. What it is right now is really a monoculture with 4 corners of student housing, not much else. And if you go to the whole area, you're talking 1,000 students plus in this neighborhood, which is great, but there's not much else there. There's no amenities really for anything else. So without amenities to support a community, you really just have a singular use ability to really do nothing else. That transition in this neighborhood should be graceful. It should, you know, not impact the surrounding neighborhoods financially. We should not have to subsidize this project from a neighborhood standpoint. And then it should enhance a real vibrant community across the board. Oh, I'd love to see the interaction that is much different between the neighborhoods, the campus, that transition there. The thing that has always been and always understood, I think, from the neighborhoods here is that Boise Avenue has been the, I don't want to say this, the transition where we protect the neighborhoods from Boise. Boise State and that student encroachment. I understand that students live in and are living in apartments and housing in Southeast Boise. That is not going to change. So again, with those thoughts, I'm really challenged that there's not been a real thoughtful or an intentional thought about what to do with Southeast Boise and the campus and that whole community here. It's like we're sticking something in without really a master plan of what to do for the future. So again, I ask you to deny this application. It's basically the same thing that was presented before. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Pardon me. Was that the end of your testimony? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rollinger. Next, we'll hear from Ted Reithman. Once you unmute, Ted, please start with your name and address. Ted, in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you should see a mute and unmute button. If you click that, we should be able to hear you.
Madam Chair, he just dropped off the call.
Here. Looks like we just lost him. I see that Bart has his hand up again.
Madam Chair, maybe we can just allow them to talk because they had a comment about Ted's
Great.
having
Yeah,
connections.
absolutely.
Connection issues.
It was that Ted had been trying to get in and was having difficulty, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, is there anybody else that wanted to speak on this item tonight? Please virtually raise your hand if so.
Oh, Ted's back?
Ted back? Oh, we got Ted back on and he looks like he's unmuted. Ted, are you there?
I am. I actually accidentally raised my hand. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And I see that we have we've got Dixie's hand up again.
Yeah.
Well, I was speaking for a second. Hi there, to the Dykmans. Did you have something else to? Maybe that was an accident, the hand raised there. Dixie, are you on the line there?
Okay.
Okay, that must have been an accident. Okay, is there anybody else that wanted to testify tonight that hasn't yet? Please virtually raise your hand.
Madam Chair, I thought I saw John Bertram, so I'm just gonna allow him to talk real quick.
Great.
See. John, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Great, please start with your name
Madam-
and address and you'll have 3 minutes.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, John Bertram, 1 West Parkview Place on the bench. I encourage you to deny this rezone for the 3rd time. This project remains an oversized student housing project, which eliminates affordable housing, decimates the wooded site, buries and paves over the historic mill ditch, the Bub Canal, and excavates into the bench slope. It will also overwhelm the area with student vehicles taking up a limited on-street parking. Minimal concessions have been made, but offering 6 two-bedroom apartments with outdoor access out of 175 units is a token amount less than 1%. Likewise, offering 2,375 square feet retail use and now calling it mixed-use development is absurd and unlikely to strengthen the neighborhood activity center. This token retail is only 1% of the total of the project's square feet. Most troubling, does offering only 10 units at a reduced rate for 3 years make up for the displacement of 24 affordable housing units? Why isn't CDG offering 24 units when available affordable housing in Boise is at a crisis level? Boise seeks no net loss of affordable housing and should require a 1-to-1 replacement of new affordable units at 60% AMI. This project has awakened the surrounding neighborhood to create true neighborhood activity center. We already lost an opportunity when the Identity Student Housing Project across the street provided no mixed use. The intersection of Boise Avenue, Protest Road, and Beacon Street provides a catalyst for such a center to succeed. We need time to work together with the city, 2 neighborhood associations, and BSU to plan for a vibrant small center. This CDG project is a travesty to the history that once occurred at this location. The cultural memories that we could incorporate into a true mixed-use center are exciting and endless. We should be working together to design a neighborhood activity center that celebrates flowing water, trees, and wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bertram. So it looks like that's the end of our testimony. I'll just do one last call. If anybody would like to testify on this item tonight, please virtually raise your hand if you have not already testified. Okay, so with that, then we'll move on to a rebuttal from the applicant. Ms. Nelson, you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I'll just run through some of the comments we heard here.
We're having, you know, your mic, something's happening with the audio. We're having a hard time hearing you. It's very quiet.
Okay, how is that? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. A few responses to comments that we heard. ACHD, for the last application, ACHD did review our traffic impact study and approved it without adding any conditions for mitigation. For this application, we just did an update just to add that retail. If ACHD feels like that change results in any new mitigation, we will certainly comply with ACHD's final conditions of approval. And they will have an opportunity to review the application because they have to approve our access and the design review, and they're a commenting agency on the rezone. As to the accessibility of the building will be a fully ADA accessible building. Regarding bike parking, our 500 bikes will not be all parked outside. 496 of them will be in the secure underground garage. There's a comment about parking and problems that have been experienced due to identity. We will have more than 2 times the amount of parking per resident as identity provides, and we provide 15 more spaces than the city requires of us. We understand there's been many comments about affordable housing, and we certainly understand that there are tenants that are being displaced from their homes here. This is not a subsidized facility now, but we still understand that they are going to lose their homes, that the building is in disrepair though, and it is going to discontinue. The applicant has provided an unprecedented tenant relocation program that does include space for every single one of them to come back and live in our project if they want to. There was a comment that there's more than 10 of them and we're providing only 10 units. The tenant relocation package actually provides space for any of them that want to come back. If not, if they all don't want to come back or less than 10 want to come back, then we open up 10 to the community through the affordable housing program offer. And we are continuing to work with the city on participation in their affordable housing program to see if we can extend that term out further. Boise clearly needs housing, and we are providing that much needed housing to students and to non-students alike in a location that is ideal for this use. We have addressed the concerns of council by adding the off-site pedestrian crossing, improving the streetscape, addressing the tree mitigation, adding the new walkout units to provide that mix of housing, and we are adding this commercial space. The new commercial space is going to replace the vacant Maverick and activate the streetscape along with that accompanying outdoor public plaza. We've really studied the neighborhood to see what kind of retail can be supported here. And there's been a lot of comments that it's only 1% of the building square footage. This is really the wrong metric when you're looking at what can be successful retail. Now, keep in mind that retail has got to be ground floor and street frontage to have any opportunity to succeed. Our retail is 24% of the available building ground floor street frontage. And with that, we're still providing this much needed housing. And we feel like that's the right mix for this site based on all of the things we've looked at, the plans, the surrounding uses, the need for housing, what's been requested here, what's sustainable. But we also hear the questions from the commissioners about, potentially expanding that retail space. And as Brent mentioned, they're open to that. The applicant's open to that discussion, understanding, of course, there's trade-offs. If you add more retail along that ground floor, you lose those walkout units and some of that housing and the diversity of housing that the council was looking for. So I think the commission's questions earlier really showed that you understand there are trade-offs in any location. And here I feel like the developer has come forward with a use that is suitable for the location, that's sensitive to the building heights around it, appropriate given the height of the elevation behind the property, that's appropriate for the arterial streets, for the transit location, all of the conditions and all of the provisions in your comprehensive plan that say that this is a place that can support some density, and has scaled back through all of the conditions that they've offered. It is compatible. It's responsive to the comments they've heard, both from the neighbors, from BSU, from the city council, and from the city staff and commissioners throughout this prior process. And so we ask for you to take all that into consideration, and we ask for your approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will close the public portion of the hearing, and the item is now before the commission.
Madam Chairman,
Commissioner Gillespie.
just to get us started and get something up the flagpole and see who salutes, I'll take a crack at a motion. So I move that we recommend to the City Council approval of CAR 20-25 with all the terms and conditions in the staff report, and for all those reasons. And I also recommend that we amend section 4 of the staff report, the terms and conditions, to include a specific condition in the development agreement requiring 4,600 square feet of retail commercial space or something similar. So basically doubling and getting that square footage into the DA. I recommend we add that as a condition of approval. And I'll end my motion there.
Do we have a second?
Okay, it's someone else's turn.
So the motion fails.
Yeah, so that motion fails. Who's next?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Blanchard.
I will just take a stab here and do this as cleanly as possible. And I recommend that we approve this to City Council, as I believe it meets the criteria outlined in the Boise City Code as well as the comprehensive plan.
I second that.
Okay, great. We have a second from Commissioner Gillespie. Would you like to start the discussion, Commissioner Blanchard?
Thank you, Commissioner Gillespie, and thank you, Madam Chair. I just always find, it seems in my limited experience on the commission here, that it's easier just to get these things out clean rather than to try to do amendments from the dais. I think that there's plenty of opportunity in the future for one, for council to have their say on this, and second, for DR to have their say on this. So I think that there's plenty of opportunity. All we're being asked is if a rezone meets the city code and if it meets the comprehensive plan, and I think we're in agreement there. Before finishing up going through my reasons for putting it out like this, I do want to just say one thing, is that I've read it on Boise Bench Dwellers, and I've read it on Twitter and all over Facebook. Really harsh comments from residents on this. And we heard it tonight, somebody accusing our planning director of openly advocating for this project. And I just want to say that there isn't any space for that kind of input in this. No one should be attacking city staff. No one should be attacking appointed officials on what I would say are libelous claims, saying that, you know, we're in the pockets of developers and we're cutting all these backroom deals, and that kind of thing just doesn't happen. And there's no room for that kind of discourse. So I just want to throw that out there really quickly, because our staff certainly does not deserve that kind of beating. I'm not persuaded by a lot of the other things that were thrown out there as far as this being a viable neighborhood activity center. I think it's not. I think the businesses along Boise Avenue, like the restaurant that I think is currently Addie's, has struggled and has always struggled. I think Crickets has struggled and is still struggling, will probably always struggle. So I don't find it genuine to say, you know, if we put 5,000 square feet, or if we just built more retail, or we built this more, you know, elaborate community center, that residents would support it. I don't think they're going to. I think the people who live in John Bertram's neighborhood and live up on the bench, there are either running down the hill to go to the Broadway market, or they're going over to the bench, and they're not going to stop at that corner there for any reason. I think, you know, people who live further out either way towards either Capitol Boulevard or Broadway are going out there. And I just don't see this as being a viable neighborhood center. So I'm not really super persuaded that we can do anything to make it thus. I think with the growth of the neighborhood, or the growth of the university over the last, I spent 12 years there on campus with Dr. McCluskey, and it's pretty well established that that is going to be a Boise State neighborhood. I will also say that Boise State has been lax in their master planning since the time when I started there in 2002, and they're probably not any better off now. Another thing said, though, is that Boise State is certainly not ever going to be able to build its way out of housing. Those days are over. The way it was done before was that tuition was raised every year so that they could sell bonds and fund housing on campus. That ain't happening anymore. And the legislature certainly isn't going to fund it. So there's going to be more of these public-private partnerships out there. It's going to become the norm. Another thing that is going to become the norm is social and community living. I still think that these kind of developments, especially focused on student housing, are getting even riskier right now, which Dr. McCluskey pointed out. But social and community living is definitely the way of the future, and I see that as a professional affordable housing developer. I see that all over the country. So. Those units, I suspect, will have some kind of appeal in the future. And I was really kind of surprised that the only safety, I think that Beacon is one of the worst functioning streets in the city, frankly, and nobody really brought that up. That's where the real dangers are. Boise Avenue's, you know, and I've lived in this neighborhood and again was on campus for 12 years. Again, Beacon is the real safety issue and not Boise Avenue. I think the real threat is people riding their bicycles the wrong way down that sidewalk and crashing into residents on the corner. And so that's probably something that they'll have to figure out there. But I feel very bad for the residents of Reidenbaugh. It's too bad that idyllic space there is just not financially viable. But this is a choice, you know, that's made by your landlord and a series of choices over all the years. And again, we're just left having to address with how do we zone this property for the future, and that's really all we can do here tonight.
Any further comments?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
So as the reason that I didn't support Commissioner Gillespie's motion, I'm really hesitant to kind of impose restrictions like that from the dais. I know that there's a lot of factors that can go into increasing areas like that. And while I don't disagree that maybe some more retail or some more kind of commercially focused use there wouldn't be unwelcome, certainly, especially since we are rezoning 3/4 of an acre from commercial and only getting 2,400 square feet of retail instead. But with all those factors, it's kind of hard to impose a number without sitting around a drafting table or a computer and kind of taking all those things into account. In terms of the zoning, just looking at the rezone and looking at the conditions of approval, looking at our kind of approval criteria, I can't find a reason to go against staff's recommendation in those or the reasoning stated in that approval criteria for the rezone. And I do encourage maybe looking at some more retail, kind of studying what can happen with something like that. And yeah, in terms of the existing apartments that are there right now, I mean, in our late correspondence, we received some letter from the owner, it looks like the existing owner, stating that they're kind of outlived their economical lifestyle or lifespan, and there's some pretty heavy maintenance needed on those. And as witnessed in some of the pictures that were submitted by the land group as well. So I think, as a rezone, I think it fits. Is it perfect? No, but I think just looking at what we have to go on, go along with the motion.
Madam Chairman.
Commissioner Glassby.
So I'll chime in. So let me just go through a couple of issues. First, the sort of the density, height, setback, the actual, the nitty gritty. I do think this is different than the previous application. I think lowering the height is very significant. And I generally am okay with the density and height in this location. I think the parking and traffic, which is a third issue, was well addressed by both the city staff and the applicant. And I strongly agree that the proposed parking is adequate and correct for this site. We really want to drive people into mass transit and riding their bike and walking. And so I'm very comfortable with where we're at in parking and traffic. I, of course, wish that ACHD had a chance to weigh in, but I think the applicant was correct in pointing out that and it's in the staff report, that the level of service will be maintained in this area at acceptable levels, and nobody rebutted that. So Mr. Koppel discussed this, but he actually didn't rebut what was in the staff report. He simply pointed out that it has not been updated. I share his concern and wish it had been updated, but a rezone doesn't require an updated ACHD remarks. Now, one of the things I hope council might consider is, do they want to require a CUP at this location? If they approve the rezone, do they want to see a CUP before the development begins? Because that could require some more detailed traffic studies and updates of all these details, which I think a lot of people are justifiably concerned about. So I actually considered making a motion to add a requirement that a CUP be required for any development over 100 units, but that seemed really complicated, so I decided not to do it. But it's on the record now, so who knows what City Council will do. I was very happy to see the affordable housing issues brought forward. I think the city made it clear that when this goes back to council, they may even have a more detailed plan of how to address that. And I agreed with the city's concern about putting it in the development agreement at this point. As you can see from my motion, I am concerned about the mixed use nature. And I agree with everybody that this has been a tough corner to work on. I understand everything that Commissioner Blanchard said and Commissioner Moore. I just personally would like to encourage the developer to add some more professional / retail / non, purely residential space, because whether we think it's a good idea or not, it is a community activity center, right? Or a neighborhood activity center. That's a legal thing. That's what it is. Commissioner Blanchard and I might want to change that, but that happens at the next comp plan. So if it is a neighborhood activity center, and I think Eric and others talked about that, then we have, in my mind, a legal obligation to try and make this as mixed use as we can, because that's what the code says we're supposed to do. So I happen to agree that it's going to be a tough sell. I hope the council tries to do things to enhance that. And just finally a point, and I think several have touched on it, you know, it's not our job tonight to identify and approve the best alternative use for this site. That is never the job of the commission or the council when there's a specific application in front of us. So a lot of people tonight had really good ideas about alternatives, but sadly, that, in my opinion, is not what I'm here to do. So my job is to evaluate the application that's in front of us and decide whether or not it complies with basically the city code. And kind of that's where I am, and that's why I support Chris's motion, and that's all I got.
I will just add a couple of thoughts too. I will be supporting the motion as well, but I do have I hesitate on a couple of issues, mainly things that have already been covered, but hopefully council, when they get this recommendation, will read through our transcript and see what some of these issues are. I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Gillespie said. I support the density and the height and the parking, all of that for all the reasons stated. But I also am struggling a lot with the lack with the lack of mixed use and activation of this site. So maybe the mark has been missed a couple of times, and I don't think that we should just then let that slide. I still think that there's work to be done here. I think it would be helpful if there was more information in the code about what mixed use looked like from that perspective, that it was more detailed in the description, or that there was some kind of ground floor percentage or whatever that might be. I think that because I don't have that, it's hard for me to deny the motion without more information. But I would like to see some more activation in this, this big, impactful project that's going in that could really have a hand in defining this neighborhood. So that's all for me. Is there any further comments on this project from the commission? Okay, seeing none, then will the clerk please call the vote?
Stead.
Aye.
Blanchard.
Aye.
Moore.
Aye.
Gillespie.
Aye.
Renfrock.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you, and this meeting is adjourned.